She held his destruction in her hands and fell in love with him anyway. When Governess Fiona MacLeod arrived at Dunvegan Castle, she carried a letter proving the Duke of Strathmore was a fraud. But the man she came to ruin wasn't the monster she expected. Now someone else wants that letter, and they'll kill to get it. Subscribe now, because this secret will tear apart the most powerful family in Scotland. Mist clung to the ancient towers as her carriage climbed through the Highland Mountains toward a castle that held more ghosts than she could have imagined. The carriage lurched violently as its wheels found another rut in the mountain road, and Fiona MacLeod pressed her gloved hand against the worn leather seat to steady herself. Through the rain-streaked window, the Scottish Highlands stretched endlessly in shades of grey and green, wild and unforgiving beneath a sky heavy with October clouds. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear the cry of a golden eagle, sharp and lonely against the wind. She had been travelling for 3 days from Edinburgh, each mile taking her farther from civilization and deeper into a landscape that felt more myth than reality. The letter inside her reticule seemed to burn against her side, a constant reminder of why she had accepted this position in the first place. The Duke of Strathmore is not who he claims to be. Those words had haunted Fiona for 6 months, ever since her dying aunt had pressed the faded envelope into her hands and whispered the truth that could restore the MacLeod family's honour. Her truth that could destroy a man who had never wronged her personally, but whose very existence represented everything her family had lost. "Dunvegan Castle, miss," the driver called down, his thick Highland accent barely audible over the storm. "Just beyond the next rise." Fiona leaned forward, her breath catching as the castle emerged from the mist like something conjured from ancient legend. It was enormous, a fortress of dark grey stone that seemed to grow directly from the mountain itself. 4 towers pierced the low-hanging clouds, and narrow windows glowed with candlelight against the gathering dusk. The structure spoke of centuries, of power that had weathered wars and political upheaval, of a family that had ruled these lands since before the Stuarts had claimed the throne. A family built on a lie. The carriage rolled through massive iron gates, past gardens that even in their autumn decline showed evidence of meticulous care. Stone statues of ancient warriors stood sentinel along the drive, their faces worn smooth by Highland weather, but their poses still proud, still defiant. Fiona understood that defiance. She had worn it like armour for years, ever since her own father's death had left the MacLeod family with nothing but debts and a crumbling estate in the Outer Hebrides. The carriage stopped before the main entrance, where a footman immediately appeared with an umbrella despite the rain. Fiona gathered her simple travelling cloak and stepped down, her boots finding purchase on wet cobblestones. The wind tore at her bonnet, carrying with it the scent of peat smoke and something else, something wild and elemental that spoke of mountains and ancient forests. "Miss MacLeod," a woman's voice cut through the storm, crisp and efficient. "I am Mrs. Buchanan, the housekeeper. His Grace is occupied at present, but I am to show you to your quarters and introduce you to Lady Isla." Fiona turned to see a woman of perhaps 50 years, dressed in impeccable black silk, with a chatelaine of keys at her waist. Her face was stern but not unkind, weathered in the way of women who had spent their lives in service to great houses. "Thank you, Mrs. Buchanan," Fiona replied, matching the housekeeper's formal tone. "I apologize for arriving so late in the day. The roads were more difficult than anticipated." "The Highland roads are treacherous even in good weather, miss. You're fortunate to have arrived at all." Mrs. Buchanan gestured toward the entrance. "Come, we'll get you warm and dry before supper." Fiona followed the housekeeper through doors that must have been 12 feet tall, into an entrance hall that stole her breath despite her determination to remain unimpressed. The ceiling soared 3 stories above, crossed with ancient timber beams dark with age. A massive fireplace dominated one wall, large enough to roast an entire stag, and portraits of stern-faced men and elegant women lined the stone walls, watching the comings and goings of their descendants with painted eyes that seemed to follow movement. Your descendants, Fiona thought, looking up at a particularly imposing portrait of a man in 18th century dress. But not his. Not the current Duke. "The castle dates to the 13th century, Mrs. Buchanan said, mistaking Fiona's scrutiny for admiration. "Though it has been expanded and modernized over the generations, The east wing, where you'll be residing with Lady Isla, was added during the reign of Queen Anne. They climbed a sweeping stone staircase, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Suits of armor stood in alcoves, and tapestries depicting ancient battles hung between windows that looked out over rain-swept moorland. Everything spoke of permanence, of a family so rooted in this land that removing them would be like tearing out the mountains themselves. Fiona's resolve wavered for the first time since leaving Edinburgh. This was real. These were not abstractions or names in legal documents. These were lives, a legacy, a world that would crumble if she revealed what she knew. Lady Isla is 7 years old, Mrs. Buchanan continued, as they walked down a corridor lit by oil lamps. She came to us 8 months ago following the death of her parents in a carriage accident. His Grace is her guardian and closest living relative. The child has had difficulty adjusting, I must warn you. She has been through 3 governesses since her arrival. 3? Fiona asked, surprised despite herself. The girl is spirited, Mrs. Buchanan said diplomatically. She locks herself in her room, refuses lessons, and has a tendency to disappear into the castle for hours. The last governess left after Lady Isla released a family of mice in her bedchamber. Despite the gravity of her situation, Fiona felt a smile tug at her lips. I see. I shall have to win her trust before attempting any traditional instruction. Mrs. Buchanan stopped before a heavy oak door and studied Fiona with new interest. You have experience with difficult children, Miss MacLeod. I have experience with grief, Mrs. Buchanan, and I suspect that is what truly troubles Lady Isla, not defiance for its own sake. The housekeeper's stern expression softened almost imperceptibly. Perhaps you will fare better than the others, then. This is your room. Lady Isla's chamber is directly next door, and the schoolroom is at the end of the corridor. I'll send up hot water and tea. Supper is at 8 in the dining hall, though as governess you may take your meals in the schoolroom if you prefer. I would like to meet Lady Isla before supper, if that's possible. She's likely in her room. I warn you, she may not respond to your knock. Then I shall have to be more creative than knocking, Fiona said. Mrs. Buchanan almost smiled. His Grace will want to meet with you tomorrow morning. He takes his breakfast in the library at 7. I suggest you be prompt. The Duke does not appreciate tardiness. After the housekeeper departed, Fiona entered her assigned chamber and found it far more luxurious than she had anticipated. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, hung with deep green velvet curtains. A writing desk stood before one window, and a small fireplace already burned cheerfully, taking the chill from the October air. Her travelling trunk had been delivered and sat at the foot of the bed. Fiona removed her wet cloak and bonnet, catching sight of herself in the mirror above the washstand. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman of good birth fallen on hard times. Her dress was well made, but several years out of fashion, her hair a deep auburn that she wore in a simple knot, and her face bore the kind of beauty that went unnoticed in ballrooms but showed itself in quieter moments. Intelligent grey eyes, a determined chin, and a mouth that smiled rarely but genuinely. She reached into her reticule and withdrew the letter, its paper yellowed with age, the seal broken long ago by her aunt's trembling fingers. She had memorized every word, but still she unfolded it carefully, reading once more the neat script that condemned the Duke of Strathmore. Down to whom it may concern, I write this account with a sound mind and heavy heart, to testify that on the 5th of June, 1802, I witnessed the marriage of Thomas Drummond, second son of the Duke of Strathmore, to Miss Margaret Sinclair in the parish church of Inverness. This marriage occurred while Mr. Drummond was still legally bound to his first wife, Miss Eileen MacLeod, whom he had married in secret 3 years prior. The first marriage was never dissolved, making the second marriage invalid and any children born of it illegitimate. I place this account in the keeping of Miss Eileen MacLeod's family, that the truth may someday be known. Signed this day, December 10th, 1815, Reverend Angus Mackenzie. Fiona's Aunt Eileen had been that first wife, cast aside when Thomas Drummond's family had arranged a more advantageous match. She had lived in obscurity and poverty, raising a daughter alone, never revealing the truth because she feared the power of the Drummond family. But on her deathbed, she had given Fiona both the letter and a mission, Restore what had been taken from the MacLeods. The current Duke, Alistair Drummond, was the grandson of that bigamous union. He had no idea his entire life was built on his grandfather's lie. A sudden crash from the next room shattered Fiona's reverie. She quickly returned the letter to her reticule and moved to the connecting door, pressing her ear against the wood. She could hear muffled sobbing, the sound of something being thrown against a wall, and a young voice crying out words Fiona couldn't quite distinguish. Without hesitation, Fiona tried the handle and found it unlocked. She opened the door slowly, revealing a disaster of a room. Books lay scattered across the floor, a china doll sat broken in the corner, and in the middle of it all, a small girl with wild, dark curls and a tear-stained face stood clutching a miniature portrait to her chest. "Get out!" Lady Isla shouted, her voice breaking. "I don't want another governess. Go away!" Fiona didn't leave. Instead, she entered the room, closed the door behind her, and sat down on the floor among the wreckage. She said nothing, simply folded her hands in her lap and waited. Lady Isla stared at her, clearly thrown by this unexpected response. "I said get out," she repeated, less forcefully. "I heard you," Fiona said calmly. "But I'm comfortable here, and I thought you might like some company. You don't have to talk to me if you don't wish to." "You're strange," the girl said suspiciously. "I've been told that before." Fiona picked up one of the scattered books and examined its cover. Gulliver's Travels. An excellent choice. "Have you reached the part about the Houyhnhams yet?" Despite herself, Isla's curiosity was piqued. "The talking horses." "The very same. Though I always wondered what it would be like to visit the flying island of Laputa instead. Imagine an entire city in the clouds." Isla moved a step closer, still clutching the miniature. "Do you think such things are real?" "I think the world is far stranger and more wonderful than most people imagine. I've seen the northern lights dance over the Hebrides, watched selkies swim in the sea caves of my childhood home, and heard the wind carry voices of the ancient Picts through the standing stones." "Selkies," Isla whispered, entranced despite her earlier hostility. "Seal people, who can shed their skins and walk as humans. But that's a story for another time." Fiona gestured to the miniature. "Is that your mother?" Isla's face crumpled, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. She nodded, unable to speak. "She was beautiful," Fiona said gently. "Would you like to tell me about her?" For a long moment, Isla said nothing. Then, slowly, she sank to the floor beside Fiona and began to talk. She spoke of her mother's laugh, her father's terrible jokes, the house in Edinburgh where she had been happy, and the terrible day when a servant had come to her nursery to tell her that her parents' carriage had overturned on an icy road. Fiona listened without interrupting, without offering empty platitudes. When Isla finally fell silent, exhausted from crying, Fiona reached out and gently took her hand. "I lost my father when I was 10, she said quietly, "and for a long time I was very angry. Angry at God, angry at the world, angry at my father for leaving me. But then I realized something important." "Are you ready to hear it?" Isla nodded, her grey eyes so similar to Fiona's own, fixed on her new governess's face. "The people we love never truly leave us. They live on in our memories, in the things they taught us, in the way we see the world. Your mother and father are part of you, Lady Isla, and as long as you remember them with love, they are never really gone." "Do you still remember your father?" Isla asked. "Every day. He taught me to read Latin, to ride horses, and to never be afraid of asking difficult questions." "What happened to him?" "He made some bad investments and lost everything. The shame and stress broke his heart." Fiona paused, then added more softly, "But he also taught me that honor matters more than wealth, and that truth, however painful, is always better than a comfortable lie." A bell chimed somewhere in the depths of the castle, marking the hour. "That's the supper bell," Isla said. "Uncle Alistair will expect me in the dining hall." "Your uncle, the Duke?" "He's not really my uncle. He's my father's cousin, but I call him Uncle because that's what Mama wanted." Isla stood and brushed at her rumpled dress. "He's very important and very busy. I try not to bother him too much." Fiona heard the loneliness behind those words, and felt her heart twist. "Would you like me to help you dress for supper? We could fix your hair, and you could show me the way to the dining hall." For the first time, Isla smiled, a small, tentative thing, but genuine. "I suppose that would be all right. But I should warn you, Uncle Alistair can be quite frightening when he wants to be. He has a terrible frown, and his voice can shake the rafters." "Then we shall have to make sure we give him no reason to frown at us," Fiona said, helping the girl select a clean dress from the wardrobe. 20 minutes later, with Isla presentable and Fiona having changed into her one good evening dress, a simple gown of deep blue wool that had belonged to her mother, they descended the great staircase together. The dining hall proved to be a cavernous room with a table that could easily seat 40 people. Tonight, however, only one place was set at the head of the table, where a man sat reading correspondence by candlelight. He looked up as they entered, and Fiona felt the breath catch in her throat. The Duke of Strathmore was nothing like she had imagined. She had expected an older man, perhaps soft from luxury, certainly arrogant with the privilege of his position. Instead, Alistair Drummond appeared to be in his early 30s, tall and powerfully built in a way that suggested he spent as much time on horseback as in drawing rooms. His hair was dark as a raven's wing, worn slightly longer than current fashion dictated, and his face bore the kind of rugged handsomeness that belonged more to Highland warriors than to aristocratic drawing rooms. But it was his eyes that truly arrested her, deep blue, intense, and at this moment, studying her with an intelligence that made her feel as though he could see straight through her carefully constructed composure. "Uncle Alistair," Isla said, dropping into a curtsy. "This is Miss MacLeod, my new governess." The Duke rose, his movements fluid and controlled. He was even taller than Fiona had first thought, and when he bowed, formally, correctly, she found herself having to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. "Miss MacLeod," he said, and his voice was exactly as Isla had described, deep, resonant, with the ability to command attention effortlessly. "Welcome to Dunvegan Castle. I trust Mrs. Buchanan has seen to your comfort. She has been most attentive, Your Grace, thank you. And I see you have already succeeded where 3 others have failed. You have convinced my ward to appear for supper without threats or bribery." The ghost of a smile touched his lips as he glanced at Isla. "How did you accomplish this miracle, Miss MacLeod?" "I simply asked her to show me the way, Your Grace. Lady Isla has been most helpful in introducing me to my new home." Something flickered in the Duke's eyes. Approval, perhaps, or merely surprise. "Indeed. Well, you must both be hungry. Both be. Please, join me." Footmen appeared as if summoned by magic, pulling out chairs and setting additional places. Fiona found herself seated to the Duke's right, with Isla across from her, and as the first course was served, a rich venison soup fragrant with herbs, she became acutely aware of his presence. He took up space in a way that went beyond mere physical size. There was an intensity to him, a barely contained energy that made the air seem charged. "Mrs. Buchanan informs me you come highly recommended from the McIntyre family in Edinburgh," the Duke said, his attention on Fiona in a way that made her feel simultaneously visible and exposed. "I served them for 2 years, Your Grace. Lady McIntyre was kind enough to provide a reference. And before that," Fiona had prepared for this question, "I cared for my ailing aunt in the Outer Hebrides. When she passed, I found I needed to support myself." It was true, as far as it went. She simply omitted the part about the letter and the plan that had brought her here. "Kay the Outer Hebrides," the Duke repeated thoughtfully. "MacLeod is a Skye name, if I'm not mistaken. My family held lands there once." "Yes." "Held?" His eyes sharpened. "Past tense." "We lost them." Fiona met his gaze steadily, allowing just enough bitterness to show. "My father made poor investments. When he died, there was nothing left." She saw understanding dawn in his expression, followed by something that looked like compassion. "I am sorry for your loss, Miss MacLeod, both of your family's lands and of your father." The kindness in his voice was unexpected, and Fiona felt her carefully maintained emotional distance waver. This was not supposed to be difficult. The Duke of Strathmore was meant to be an abstraction, a target, a means to an end. He was not supposed to be human. "Tell Miss MacLeod about the library, Uncle Alistair," Isla said suddenly, drawing both adults' attention. "She likes books. She knows all about Swift and the Hoyne gems." The Duke's expression transformed when he looked at his young ward. The intensity softened into genuine affection, and Fiona saw the man beneath the title, someone capable of tenderness, of caring deeply for a child who was not his own. "Does she indeed?" He turned back to Fiona. "Then you must make use of the library during your time here, Miss MacLeod. It contains one of the finest collections in Scotland. My grandfather spent a lifetime assembling it." "Your grandfather, the bigamist," Fiona thought, but aloud she said only, "That is most generous, Your Grace. I would be honoured." The remainder of the meal passed in surprisingly pleasant conversation. The Duke, despite his formidable reputation, proved to be well-read and possessed of a dry wit that occasionally surprised a laugh from Fiona. He asked intelligent questions about her teaching philosophy, listened attentively when Isla chatted about her day, and somehow managed to make a table designed for 40 feel almost intimate. When the meal concluded, and a yawning Isla was sent off to bed with her new governess, the Duke rose and bowed once more. "Miss MacLeod, might I have a word before you retire?" Fiona's heart stuttered, but she kept her expression calm. "Of course, Your Grace." He led her to a small sitting room off the main hall, closing the door for privacy but leaving it slightly ajar. Proper, correct, mindful of her reputation, even though she was merely a governess. "I want to thank you," he said without preamble, "for whatever you did to reach Ela tonight. She has been—" He paused, searching for words. "She has been lost since her parents died. Angry and lost. And in one evening you gave her back a bit of hope. That is no small thing. She's a remarkable child, Your Grace. She simply needed someone to listen." "Yes, well, previous governesses seemed more interested in discipline than understanding." He ran a hand through his dark hair, and Fiona caught a glimpse of exhaustion beneath his controlled exterior. "I confess, I am not well suited to raising a child. I inherited this title at 25, and I have spent the past 8 years learning to manage estates, navigate Parliament, and maintain the family's standing. None of that prepared me for a grieving 7-year-old girl who has lost everything." The vulnerability in his admission struck Fiona like a physical blow. She had not expected this, had not prepared for a man who would confess his fears, who would care so deeply about a child's well-being. "You are doing better than you think, Your Grace," she heard herself say. "Isla speaks of you with great affection." "Does she?" He looked genuinely surprised. "I worry I am too stern with her, too distant. My own father was not a warm man." Because he knew he was illegitimate, Fiona thought, because he lived with the secret his entire life. "Children need structure and boundaries," she said carefully, "but they also need to know they are loved. I think Lady Isla knows that, even if you don't say the words." The Duke studied her for a long moment, and Fiona felt the full weight of his attention. There was something in his gaze that made her pulse quicken, something that had nothing to do with her mission, and everything to do with the man standing before her. Intelligent, powerful, unexpectedly kind, and devastatingly attractive in a way that transcended mere physical appearance. "I'm glad you're here, Miss MacLeod," he said finally. "But I believe you may be exactly what this household needs." "I am here to destroy you," Fiona thought, even as she curtsied and murmured, "Thank you, Your Grace. I shall do my best to be worthy of your trust." As she climbed the stairs to her chamber later, the weight of the letter in her reticule felt heavier than ever. She had come to Dunvegan Castle with a clear purpose, driven by family honour and years of resentment, but that was before she had met Isla, a child who had already lost so much, before she had encountered Alistair Drummond, who was nothing like the villain she had constructed in her imagination. Fiona stood at her window, looking out over the moonlit highlands, and felt the first tremors of doubt. Somewhere in this ancient castle, the truth waited to be revealed. But for the first time, Fiona wondered whether some truths might be better left buried. The first week at Dunvegan Castle passed in a rhythm that Fiona found both comforting and unsettling. Each morning began at dawn, when pale highland light filtered through her window, and the castle stirred to life with the distant sounds of servants preparing for the day. She would dress carefully in one of her 3 serviceable gowns, pin her auburn hair into a neat knot, and make her way to the schoolroom where Isla would be waiting, sometimes eagerly, sometimes with residual stubbornness, but always there. The child was proving to be remarkably intelligent when she chose to apply herself. She had a quick mind for mathematics, a natural aptitude for languages, and an insatiable curiosity about the natural world. But more than academics, what Isla seemed to crave was simple human connection. She would follow Fiona through the castle corridors, chattering about everything and nothing, asking endless questions about Fiona's childhood, her family, her thoughts on subjects ranging from philosophy to the proper way to train a puppy. It was during one of these conversations, as they walked through the portrait gallery on a grey afternoon, that Isla provided Fiona with information she hadn't expected. "That's my grandfather," Isla said, pointing to a stern-faced man in military dress. "Papa said he was very strict. And that's my grandmother beside him. She died when Papa was just a boy." Fiona studied the portraits with new interest. The grandfather bore a strong resemblance to the current Duke, the same intense blue eyes, the same strong jaw, but there was something else in his expression, something that looked almost like guilt. Thomas Drummond, Fiona thought, the bigamist himself. "And this," Isla continued, moving to a more recent portrait, "is Uncle Alistair's father, the previous Duke. He died 5 years ago from a fever. Uncle Alistair says he was a great man, but I think he looks sad in this painting." The late Duke did indeed look melancholy, his eyes distant, his mouth turned down at the corners. Fiona wondered if he had known the truth about his parentage, or if the secret had died with his father. "Uncle Alistair had to become Duke very young," Isla said matter-of-factly. "Mrs. Buchanan says it was a heavy burden for a man of only 28. She says he had to cancel his engagement and everything." "His engagement?" Fiona asked, trying to keep her voice casual. To Lady Moira Campbell. She was very beautiful. But Mrs. Buchanan says she didn't want to be a duchess badly enough to wait while Uncle Alistair sorted out the estates. So she married an earl instead. Isla wrinkled her nose. "I think that was rather shallow of her." Before Fiona could respond, a deep voice echoed through the gallery. "Isla, are you monopolizing Miss MacLeod's time again?" Both females turned to find the Duke approaching, dressed for riding in boots, breeches, and a coat that emphasized his powerful shoulders. His dark hair was windswept, and there was colour in his cheeks from the Highland air. "We were just studying history, Uncle Alistair," Isla said innocently. "Miss MacLeod says it's important to understand where we come from." "Does she?" The Duke's eyes found Fiona's, and she felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. "Well, Miss MacLeod is quite right, though I hope she's not filling your head with too many tales of our family's more dubious ancestors. We have our share of scoundrels in the Drummond line." "More than you know," Fiona thought. "I was just showing her the portrait of grandfather," Isla said. She wanted to know about the family. Something shifted in the Duke's expression, brief, almost imperceptible. But Fiona caught it, a tightening around his eyes, a tension in his jaw. It was gone almost immediately, replaced by his usual controlled composure. But it left Fiona wondering, does he suspect something? Has he heard rumours? "My grandfather was a complicated man," the Duke said carefully. "He served with distinction in the military and managed the estates with great skill. But he was not, I think, an easy man to know." He turned to Isla. "Now, young lady, I believe it's time for your music lesson. Mr. Campbell is waiting in the music room." "But I don't like Mr. Campbell," Isla protested. "He smells like cabbage, and he raps my knuckles with his baton when I play wrong notes." "Then I suggest you play the correct notes." The Duke's tone was firm but not unkind. "Music is an essential accomplishment for a young lady, even one who would rather be climbing trees or exploring castle ruins." Isla sighed dramatically, but obediently kissed her uncle's cheek before scampering off toward the music room. Once she was gone, the Duke turned his full attention to Fiona, and she felt suddenly exposed under that penetrating blue gaze. "Walk with me, Miss MacLeod," he said, offering his arm. "I have something I wish to discuss with you." Fiona hesitated only a moment before placing her hand on his arm Even through the fabric of his coat and her glove, she could feel the solid warmth of him, the leashed strength in those muscles. They walked in silence through the portrait gallery and out onto a covered terrace that overlooked the castle gardens. The view was breathtaking. The gardens stretched down the hillside in terraced levels, still showing autumn color in the late-blooming heather and the golden leaves of birch trees. Beyond the gardens, the highland landscape rolled away in shades of purple and green, mountains rising in the distance like the bones of the earth itself. "Beautiful, is it not?" the Duke said, following her gaze. "My mother designed these gardens. She said that living in such a wild place required creating small pockets of order and beauty. She sounds like a wise woman. She was." His voice carried a note of old grief. "She died when I was 16, a wasting illness that took her slowly." He paused, then added more quietly, "She made my father promise to take care of the gardens after she was gone. He kept that promise until the day he died." Fiona felt an unexpected surge of sympathy. Whatever sins the Drummond family had committed, the current Duke seemed to carry his own burdens of loss and responsibility. "You wish to discuss something with me, Your Grace?" she prompted gently. "Yes." The Duke turned to face her, his expression serious. "I have received word that I must travel to London in 3 days' time. Parliament is convening for an emergency session regarding trade relations with the Americas, and my presence is required. I will be gone for at least a fortnight, possibly longer." "I see." Fiona kept her voice neutral, though her mind was already racing with the implications. "But I'm concerned about leaving Isla," he continued. "She has only just begun to settle with you. I worry that my absence might unsettle her again. Children are often more resilient than we give them credit for, Your Grace. And I will be here to provide stability in your absence." "Yes, but there is another matter." The Duke glanced around as though checking for eavesdroppers, then lowered his voice. "There have been incidents lately, small things, perhaps meaningless, but they trouble me nonetheless." "What kind of incidents?" Papers moved in my study. I sense that someone has been going through the family archives, and last week one of the servants reported seeing a stranger on the grounds at night, a man who disappeared before anyone could confront him. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Fiona was beginning to recognize as a sign of frustration. It may be nothing. Poachers, perhaps, or a vagrant seeking shelter. But I cannot shake the feeling that someone is searching for something. Fiona's blood ran cold. Could there be someone else who knew about the letter? Someone who sought the same evidence she possessed? "Have you increased security?" she asked, proud of how steady her voice remained. "I have instructed the groundskeeper to patrol more frequently, and I've had new locks installed on the estate offices. But Miss MacLeod—" He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "I must ask you to be vigilant during my absence. Keep Isla close. If you notice anything unusual, anything at all, I want you to inform Mrs. Buchanan immediately, and she will send word to me in London." "Of course, Your Grace. You have my word." He studied her for a long moment, and Fiona had the unsettling sensation that he was seeing past her governess's demeanor to something deeper. "I find myself trusting you, Miss MacLeod, which is unusual for me. I do not give my trust easily." "I will do everything in my power to be worthy of it," Fiona said, and felt the bitter irony of those words. "I know you will." He smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed his face from merely handsome to something that made Fiona's heart skip. "Isla is fortunate to have you. As am I." Before Fiona could formulate a response, a commotion from the entrance hall drew their attention. Voices raised in greeting, the sound of horses and carriages in the courtyard. The Duke frowned. "I was not expecting visitors," he muttered, already moving toward the doors. Fiona followed, curiosity overriding propriety. They emerged into the entrance hall to find it filled with activity. Servants bustled about with luggage, and in the center of it all stood 3 people who could only be members of the aristocracy, judging by their expensive traveling clothes and air of entitlement. The woman at the center of the group was perhaps 25, breathtakingly beautiful with golden hair, porcelain skin, and a figure that her fashionable pelisse displayed to advantage. She was currently removing her gloves with deliberate grace, revealing hands adorned with costly rings. "Alistair," she exclaimed, spotting the Duke. "What a dreadfully primitive place this is. I had forgotten how positively medieval the Highlands can be." The Duke's expression had gone carefully neutral. "Lady Catriona, this is unexpected." So this was Lady Catriona Sinclair, the wealthy heiress the Duke was expected to marry. Fiona felt an irrational stab of something that felt uncomfortably like jealousy. "Unexpected but delightful, I'm sure," Lady Catriona said, gliding forward to offer her hand to the Duke. He bowed over it correctly, but without warmth. "Papa insisted I come for an extended visit. He believes the Highland air will be good for my constitution." "Your constitution appeared perfectly robust in London last month," the Duke observed dryly. "Oh, you know Papa. He worries." She turned her attention to her companions, an older gentleman with mutton-chop whiskers who could only be her father, Lord Sinclair, and a younger man with fashionably styled blonde hair and an expression of perpetual amusement. "You remember Lord Malcolm Fraser, of course," Lady Catriona continued. "He was kind enough to escort us on the journey. The roads are so dreadfully dangerous for a woman travelling without male protection." Fiona saw the Duke's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. Lord Malcolm Fraser. She recognized the name from her research. He was the Duke's cousin, second in line to the title after the Duke himself. By all accounts, he was charming, popular in London society, and perpetually short of funds. "Sir Malcolm," the Duke acknowledged with a curt nod. "I trust the journey was not too arduous." "Not at all, cousin," Lord Malcolm replied smoothly. His eyes, Fiona noted, were constantly moving, taking in every detail of the entrance hall, cataloguing, assessing. When his gaze landed on her, she felt examined in a way that made her distinctly uncomfortable. "Tuz, and who is this lovely creature? Surely not another of your London acquaintances lost in the wilderness." "This is Miss MacLeod, my ward's governess," the Duke said, his tone cooling further. "Miss MacLeod, may I present Lord Malcolm Fraser, my late mother's nephew?" Fiona curtsied, keeping her expression properly neutral. "Lord Malcolm." "A governess!" Lady Catriona exclaimed, as though Fiona had just revealed herself to be some exotic species. "How delightfully Gothic! Alistair, you really are turning this place into a proper brooding fortress, aren't you? A ward, a governess, mysterious Highland mists. We shall have ghosts wandering the corridors next." "We already have those," the Duke said flatly. "Mrs. Buchanan, please show our guests to the West Wing. I'm sure they're tired from their journey and will want to rest before dinner." "Of course, Your Grace." Mrs. Buchanan appeared, her face carefully expressionless, but Fiona caught the flash of disapproval in her eyes. Clearly, these visitors were not welcome. As the party was led away, Lady Catriona still chattering brightly about the discomforts of Highland travel, Lord Malcolm paused beside Fiona. "Miss MacLeod," he said softly, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "How fascinating to meet you. I do hope we'll have the opportunity to become better acquainted during my stay." There was something in his tone that made Fiona's skin prickle with warning. She met his gaze and found him studying her with an intensity that seemed at odds with his casual manner. "I'm here to educate Lady Isla, Lord Malcolm. I have very little time for social engagements." "Pity," he said, smiling in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "I have always found governesses to be the most interesting people in any household. They see so much, hear so much. Quite invaluable, really, if one knows the right questions to ask." Before Fiona could respond, he was moving away, following his party up the grand staircase. She stood frozen, her heart racing, that brief exchange replaying in her mind. He was fishing for something, but what? "Miss MacLeod." She turned to find the Duke watching her, his expression troubled. "Be careful around my cousin," he said quietly. "Malcolm has always been ambitious, and he has a talent for finding people's secrets." "I have no secrets worth finding, Your Grace," Fiona lied. "Everyone has secrets, Miss MacLeod. Some are simply more dangerous than others." That evening, Fiona took her supper in the schoolroom with Isla, claiming fatigue from the day's excitement. In truth, she needed time to think, to process the unexpected arrival of 3 people who complicated her situation enormously. Lady Catriona Sinclair was clearly here to press her suit for marriage to the Duke. Her father, one of the wealthiest men in Scotland, had long sought the alliance. Such a marriage would further secure the Drummond fortune and political influence. It would also make revealing the truth about the Duke's legitimacy infinitely more complicated. But it was Lord Malcolm who truly worried Fiona. There had been something calculating in the way he looked at her, something that suggested he was playing a game whose rules only he fully understood. The Duke's warning echoed in her mind. Malcolm has a talent for finding people's secrets. After putting Isla to bed, Fiona returned to her own chamber and retrieved the letter from its hiding place beneath a loose floorboard she had discovered on her second day at the castle. She read it again by candlelight, studying every word, every curve of the Reverend's handwriting. "What am I doing?" she asked herself. "I came here with such certainty, such righteous purpose. But now she knew Isla, who had already lost so much and who looked at the Duke with such love and trust. Now she knew Alistair Drummond himself, a man who carried his responsibilities with honour, who cared deeply for a child not his own, who had shown Fiona more kindness and respect in a week than most aristocrats would show a governess in a lifetime. If she revealed the truth, she would destroy all of that. Isla would lose her guardian and her home. The Duke would lose everything, his title, his lands, his place in society. And for what? To restore honour to a family that existed now only in memory. A soft knock at her door startled Fiona from her thoughts. She quickly returned the letter to its hiding place and opened the door to find Mrs. Buchanan standing in the corridor, her expression grave. "Miss MacLeod, forgive the late intrusion, but I thought you should know. Lord Malcolm has been asking questions about you." Fiona's stomach dropped. "What kind of questions?" "About your background, your references, your family." He approached two of the housemaids during supper, trying to charm information out of them. Mrs. Buchanan's mouth compressed into a thin line. "I have served this family for 30 years, Miss MacLeod. I know trouble when I see it. And that man is trouble. Whatever brought him here, it was not merely to escort Lady Katrina." "What should I do?" Fiona asked, genuinely uncertain. "Be cautious. Guard your words. And if he approaches you privately, make sure you are never alone with him. Men like Lord Malcolm are dangerous when they want something." The housekeeper paused, then added more quietly, "The Duke trusts you, Miss MacLeod. Please don't give him reason to regret that trust." After Mrs. Buchanan departed, Fiona stood at her window, looking out over the moonlit highlands. Somewhere in the darkness, an owl called its cry, echoing through the ancient stones of Dunvegan Castle. She had come here as an instrument of vengeance, carrying a truth that could destroy a man. But she had not anticipated the reality of that man, the complexity of this world, or the danger that might come from unexpected quarters. Lord Malcolm Fraser was searching for something. Fiona was certain of it now. The question was whether he sought the same truth she possessed, or whether there was some other secret hidden in the walls of this ancient castle, a secret that might prove even more dangerous than her own. As she finally climbed into bed, Fiona made a decision. She would wait, watch and gather more information before taking any action. The letter would remain hidden. The truth would keep for a while longer. But she could not shake the feeling that time was running out, and that forces were already in motion that would soon spiral beyond anyone's control. In the West Wing, Lord Malcolm Fraser sat at his writing desk, composing a letter by candlelight. His hand moved swiftly across the paper, forming words that would change everything. "I have arrived at Dunvegan as planned. The Duke suspects nothing. However, there is a complication, a governess who may possess information relevant to our interests. I am investigating. Prepare for my signal. Once I have what we need, the Drummond fortune will finally be ours." He sealed the letter with wax, pressing his signet ring into the hot material. Tomorrow, he would send it south with a trusted messenger, and then the real game would begin. The morning after Lord Malcolm's arrival dawned grey and cold, with rain lashing against the castle windows, and wind howling through the chimneys like the voices of restless spirits. Fiona woke with a sense of unease she couldn't quite shake, as though the very stones of Dunvegan were warning her of approaching danger. She dressed quickly and made her way to the schoolroom, where she found Isla already waiting. Her small face pressed against the window as she watched the storm. "Do you think Uncle Alastair will still have to leave for London in such weather?" the child asked without turning around. "I imagine the Duke's duties wait for no storm, Lady Isla," Fiona replied gently. "But he will return as soon as he can. You must be brave in his absence." "I don't like Lady Katrina," Isla announced abruptly. "She looks at Uncle Alastair like he's a prize sheep at market." Despite the gravity of her own worries, Fiona had to suppress a smile. "That's not a very charitable assessment, my lady, but it's true." Isla turned from the window, her grey eyes flashing with indignation. "And Lord Malcolm is even worse. He came to my room last night and asked me all sorts of strange questions about Uncle Alastair and the castle, and whether we had any old family papers lying about. I told him to go away, but he just laughed and said I was a precocious little thing." Fiona's blood ran cold. What exactly did he ask about the papers? He wanted to know if Uncle Alastair had shown me the family archives, or if there were any old documents in the library that mentioned marriages or births or inheritances. "I thought it was very odd." Isla paused, her expression turning shrewd beyond her years. "You don't like him either, do you, Miss MacLeod?" "It's not my place to like or dislike the Duke's guests," Fiona said carefully. "But I do think you were very wise to send him away. If he bothers you again, you must tell me immediately." Their lessons that morning were disrupted repeatedly by the comings and goings of the household. Servants rushed about preparing for the Duke's departure, while Lady Katrina's shrill voice could be heard echoing through the corridors as she complained about everything from the dampness of the castle to the quality of the morning chocolate. Shortly before noon, a footman arrived with a message requesting Fiona's presence in the Duke's study. She found him standing before a roaring fire, dressed for travel in riding clothes and a heavy greatcoat. The sight of him made her heart constrict in a way she didn't want to examine too closely. "Miss MacLeod, thank you for coming," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "I wanted to speak with you before my departure." Fiona perched on the edge of a leather chair, acutely aware of the intimacy of being alone with him in this book-lined room. "Of course, Your Grace. I have spoken with Mrs. Buchanan, and she has assured me that security will be increased during my absence. However, I must impress upon you the importance of vigilance." He moved closer, his expression grave. "I do not trust my cousin, Miss MacLeod. Malcolm has always coveted what I possess, and his sudden appearance here, escorting Lady Katrina, strikes me as suspicious." "Lady Isla mentioned that he questioned her last night about family papers," Fiona said carefully. The Duke's jaw tightened. "Did he? That confirms my suspicions. Malcolm has always been interested in the Drummond family history, particularly anything relating to inheritance and succession. I believe he's searching for something, though I cannot fathom what." "I can," Fiona thought, but remained silent. "There is also the matter of Lady Katrina," the Duke continued, running a hand through his dark hair in that gesture of frustration she was learning to recognize. "Her father is determined that we should marry. It would be an advantageous alliance. The Sinclair fortune is vast, and their political connections are valuable. But He trailed off, and Fiona found herself holding her breath, waiting for him to continue. "I cannot marry where there is no genuine affection," he said finally, his voice low. "My own parents married for duty, and while they grew to respect one another, I would not call theirs a happy union. I had hoped for something different, something more. Perhaps that makes me a fool." "It makes you human, Your Grace," Fiona said softly, "and there is no shame in wishing for happiness." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "You understand," he said wonderingly. "Most people in my position would tell me to do my duty and be grateful for my advantages. But you understand." "I understand too well," Fiona thought. "I understand that you are nothing like the man I expected to find, that you are kind and honorable and far too easy to—" She stopped that thought before it could complete itself. "I must go," the Duke said reluctantly. "The weather is only worsening, and I have a long journey ahead. But, Miss MacLeod, I want you to know that I am entrusting you with what I value most in this world, Isla's well-being and safety." If anything should happen, if Malcolm or anyone else should threaten her or you, I want you to take her and leave immediately. Go to the village, to the minister's house. He is a friend and will protect you until I can return. Your Grace, surely you don't think—" "I don't know what to think," he interrupted, "but I would rather be overly cautious than neglectful. Promise me, Miss MacLeod, promise you will keep her safe." "I promise," Fiona said, and meant it with every fibre of her being. For a moment, they stood in silence, the fire crackling behind them and the storm raging outside. Then, impulsively, the Duke reached out and took her hand. Even through her glove, she could feel the warmth of his touch, the calluses that spoke of a man who rode and worked with his hands, not merely one who lounged in drawing rooms. "I find myself reluctant to leave," he said quietly, "which is absurd, as I have made this journey dozens of times before." "The storm makes everything seem more ominous," Fiona managed, though her voice sounded strange even to her own ears. "Perhaps." He squeezed her hand gently, then released it. "Take care, Miss MacLeod. I shall return as quickly as Parliament allows." After he departed, Fiona stood alone in the study, her hand still tingling from his touch. She moved to the window and watched as his carriage disappeared into the rain and mist, carrying him away toward Edinburgh and the long road south to London. "What am I doing?" she asked herself again. "I am falling for the very man I came here to destroy." The realization terrified her. That evening, with the Duke gone and the storm still battering the castle, Fiona found herself unwillingly joining the other residents for dinner in the great hall. Lady Catriona held court at the head of the table, chattering brightly about London society, while her father nodded indulgently, and Lord Malcolm watched everyone with those calculating eyes. "Tell me, Miss MacLeod," Lady Catriona said suddenly, turning her attention to Fiona like a cat spotting a mouse, "where exactly did you say your family hails from?" "The Outer Hebrides, Lady Catriona, the Isle of Skye." "How quaint. And your father was in trade, I suppose?" The dismissive tone was deliberate, designed to put Fiona in her place, but Fiona had spent too many years navigating aristocratic snobbery to be easily rattled. "My father was a gentleman, Lady Catriona. He held lands on Skye until financial reverses forced their sale." "Oh, a gentleman who lost his fortune." Lady Katrina's laugh was like breaking glass. How dreadfully tragic. "Still, I suppose it's admirable that you've found respectable employment rather than ending up in some dreadful boarding house somewhere." "Katrina, that's quite enough," Lord Sinclair said mildly, though his eyes remained fixed on his wine-glass. "The young woman is a guest under this roof. A paid employee, Papa, not a guest. There's rather a difference." Lord Malcolm had been silent throughout this exchange, but now he leaned forward, his expression one of polite interest. "MacLeod is an ancient name on Skye, is it not, Miss MacLeod? I believe there were several branches of the family, some quite distinguished." "There were," Fiona acknowledged warily. "And which branch did your family belong to?" "I confess I have something of an amateur interest in genealogy. It's fascinating how families rise and fall, how fortunes change hands, how secrets buried for generations can suddenly come to light." The emphasis on that last word was deliberate. Fiona felt it like a physical touch, probing, searching for weakness. "I'm afraid I cannot claim any particular distinction, Lord Malcolm. We were minor gentry at best." "How modest," he smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "And yet, I wonder. You see, I've been doing some research into the MacLeod family history, and I came across a rather interesting detail. There was a MacLeod woman some years ago who married into a rather prominent family, or perhaps I should say, allegedly married. The records are quite unclear. Fiona's heart was pounding so hard she was certain everyone at the table must hear it. I'm sure there were many MacLeod women who married well, Lord Malcolm. It's hardly unusual. No, indeed. But this particular case was unusual because the marriage was kept secret. Some might even say hidden deliberately. And the woman in question, Eileen MacLeod, I believe her name was, died in poverty on Skye, despite having connections to one of Scotland's wealthiest families. Don't you find that odd?" The room had gone very quiet. Even Lady Catriona had stopped her prattle, sensing the sudden tension. "I'm afraid I don't know anything about that, Lord Malcolm," Fiona said. proud of how steady her voice remained. "My knowledge of family history is quite limited." "Is it?" He was toying with his wineglass now, watching the candlelight reflect in the dark liquid. "How curious. Because I've discovered something quite remarkable in my researches. It seems that Eileen MacLeod had a daughter, and that daughter had a niece who would be approximately your age and Miss MacLeod, and who might have very good reason to seek employment in certain aristocratic households." The threat was unmistakable now. Lord Malcolm knew, or at least suspected, exactly who she was and why she was here. Fiona rose from her chair, her legs trembling but her head held high. "If you'll excuse me, I should check on Lady Isla before she retires. Thank you for dinner, Lord Sinclair, Lady Katrina." She made it out of the dining hall and halfway up the grand staircase before Lord Malcolm caught up with her. "Miss MacLeod, wait, please." She stopped but didn't turn around. "And I have nothing to say to you, Lord Malcolm." "But I have a great deal to say to you." He moved around to face her, blocking her path. Up close, his handsome features held a hardness that belied his charming manner. "You have something I need, Miss MacLeod. A letter, I believe, written by a Reverend Angus Mackenzie shortly before his death." Fiona's blood turned to ice. "Floyce, I don't know what you're talking about. Please, let's not insult each other's intelligence. You are Eileen MacLeod's great niece. You came to Dunvegan seeking revenge for your family's suffering, and you possess documentary evidence that could prove the current Duke of Strathmore is illegitimate." His smile widened. "Now the question is, what do you intend to do with that information?" "If such a letter existed," Fiona said carefully, "why would you care about it?" "Because, my dear Miss MacLeod, if my dear cousin Alistair is revealed to be a bastard, the title and fortune revert to the next legitimate male heir, which would be me." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Shall I have spent years waiting for this opportunity, years of playing the charming wastrel while I searched for proof of what I always suspected, and then you appeared, like a gift from Providence itself." "You're mad," Fiona breathed. "No, merely ambitious, and I'm offering you a partnership. You give me the letter, I use it to claim what should have been mine by rights, and you receive a generous financial settlement. Enough to restore your family's estate on Skye, to live as a gentlewoman rather than a governess. Everyone wins, except Alistair, of course, but he's young and capable. He'll survive the loss of his precious dukedom." Fiona stared at him, revulsion churning in her stomach. This was what she had sounded like in her own mind, wasn't it? Coldly calculating how to use information to destroy a man's life, justifying it as righteous vengeance. But hearing those same sentiments from Lord Malcolm's lips made her see them for what they truly were: cruel, selfish, monstrous. "No," she said firmly. "No." Lord Malcolm's expression darkened. "I don't think you understand your position, Miss MacLeod. If you refuse to cooperate, I will simply expose you for what you are, a spy who infiltrated this household under false pretenses. I'll tell Alistair about your connection to Eileen MacLeod, about your real purpose here. You'll be dismissed without references, ruined. Is that what you want?" "Better that than to be party to your schemes," Fiona said. His hand shot out and gripped her wrist, hard enough to hurt. "You're making a terrible mistake. I always get what I want, one way or another. If you won't give me the letter willingly, I'll find other ways to persuade you. That child you're so fond of, for instance. Accidents happen so easily to children, especially in a castle as old and dangerous as this one." "You wouldn't dare," Fiona whispered, but she saw the truth in his eyes. He absolutely would. "Think about my offer," Lord Malcolm said, releasing her wrist. "You have until Alistair returns from London to decide. After that, I take matters into my own hands." He turned and descended the stairs, leaving Fiona trembling with rage and fear. She found Isla already in bed, having been put there by one of the maids. The child was sleeping peacefully, unaware of the danger that surrounded her. Fiona stood watching her for a long moment, then made a decision. She returned to her own chamber and retrieved the letter from its hiding place. She sat at her writing desk and, by candlelight, composed a new document, a detailed account of everything Lord Malcolm had said, his threats, his plans, everything. She sealed it and addressed it to the Duke in London, then called for a footman. "This must reach his Grace as quickly as possible," she said, pressing coins into the servant's hand. "Use the fastest messenger available. It's urgent." After the footman departed, Fiona returned the original letter to its hiding place and then, on impulse, created a second hiding spot beneath a loose stone in the fireplace. She would move the letter between locations regularly, making it harder for Lord Malcolm to find even if he searched her room. But she knew with a sinking certainty that this was only a temporary solution. Lord Malcolm was dangerous, determined, and ruthless, and with the Duke gone, she and Isla were vulnerable. The storm raged on through the night, and Fiona lay awake in her bed, listening to the wind howl and the rain batter the ancient stones. Somewhere in the castle, Lord Malcolm was plotting his next move, and somewhere on the road to London the Duke travelled unknowingly toward a confrontation that would determine all their fates. Fiona had come to Dunvegan Castle seeking vengeance, but now she found herself in the position of defender, willing to do whatever was necessary to protect the very man she had planned to destroy. How did it come to this, she wondered? When did everything become so complicated? But deep in her heart she knew the answer. It had become complicated the moment she had met Alistair Drummond and discovered that he was not a villain, but a man. Flawed, yes, but honourable, kind, and worthy of far better than what either she or his cousin had planned for him. The question now was whether she could protect him from Lord Malcolm's schemes without revealing her own secrets, and whether, when the truth finally came to light, the Duke would ever be able to forgive her for the deception that had brought her into his life. 3 days after the Duke's departure, the storm that had been battering Dunvegan finally broke, giving way to an eerie calm. The highlands emerged washed clean, the heather glowing purple in weak autumn sunlight, the mountains sharp against a pale sky. But the calm weather brought no peace to Fiona's troubled mind. Lord Malcolm had maintained a veneer of civility since their confrontation on the stairs, but Fiona felt his eyes on her constantly, watching, waiting for an opportunity. He made a show of being the perfect guest, charming Lady Catriona, discussing business with her father, playing chess with Isla in the evenings. But Fiona knew it was all performance, a predator circling his prey. She had received no word from the Duke, which worried her. Her letter should have reached London by now, but perhaps he was too occupied with parliamentary business to respond immediately, or perhaps something had happened to her messenger on the treacherous Highland roads. On the fourth morning, Fiona woke to discover that the calm had been merely the eye of the storm. By midday, another tempest was rolling in from the Atlantic, this one even more violent than the last. Thunder rumbled across the mountains, and lightning cracked the sky in brilliant forks. "Miss MacLeod!" Isla burst into the schoolroom, where Fiona had been preparing lessons, her eyes wide with excitement. "Mrs. Buchanan says we must close all the windows in the east wing before the storm hits properly. May I help? Please." Fiona smiled despite her worries. "I don't see why not. It will be far more educational than conjugating French verbs." They spent the next hour moving through the east wing, a part of the castle Fiona had not yet explored thoroughly. It was older than the main residence, built during the reign of Queen Anne, as Mrs. Buchanan had mentioned. The corridors were narrower, the ceilings lower, and many of the rooms stood empty and dust-covered, relics of a time when the household had been larger. "Uncle Alistair says this wing hasn't been properly used since his grandmother died," Isla explained, as they latched a stubborn window. She liked to host grand house parties, but after she passed, Grandfather didn't have the heart for entertaining. And Father, the previous Duke, preferred to live simply. "It seems a shame to let such beautiful rooms go to waste," Fiona observed, looking around at what had once been an elegant sitting room. Even beneath the Holland covers and accumulated dust, she could see the quality of the furnishings, the skill in the plasterwork ceiling. "Uncle Alistair says perhaps when he marries, his wife will want to restore it." Isla wrinkled her nose. "Though I hope it's not Lady Katrina. She would probably paint everything pink and gold and fill it with horrible little dogs." Fiona laughed, despite herself. "Lady Isla, that's unkind." "But true. You've seen how she fusses over that awful pug she brought with her. It wheezes and snorts and leaves hair everywhere. Uncle Alistair can't stand it." They were closing the last window when the storm hit in earnest. Rain lashed against the glass with sudden violence, and a tremendous crack of thunder made both of them jump. The lights from their candles flickered wildly in the sudden draught. "We should return to the main wing," Fiona said, taking Isla's hand. "Quickly now." But as they hurried down the corridor toward the connecting passage, Fiona heard a sound that made her stop dead, a door slamming somewhere ahead of them, followed by the distinct sound of a key turning in a lock. She rushed forward with Isla at her heels, reaching the heavy oak door that connected the east wing to the main castle. She tried the handle once, twice, then pounded on the wood. "Hello! We're locked in! Someone open the door!" No response came, only the howling of the wind and the drumming of rain against stone. "Tell us, would someone lock it?" Isla asked, her voice small and frightened. Fiona's mind was racing. This was no accident. Someone had deliberately trapped them here, and she had a very good idea who. "Don't worry," she said, forcing calm into her voice. "There must be another way back to the main wing. Let's explore." They searched for nearly an hour, trying every door, every passage, but found them all either locked or leading to dead ends. The east wing, it seemed, had only one proper connection to the inhabited portion of the castle, and that was now barred against them. The storm was intensifying. Rain found its way through cracks in the old stonework, creating small puddles on the floor. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and their candles were burning low. "I'm cold," Isla whispered, pressing close to Fiona's side. Fiona put her arm around the child, her own fear mounting. They were trapped, alone, in an unused wing of the castle during a violent storm. If no one realized they were missing until supper, a sound from below made them both freeze. Footsteps, deliberate and unhurried, climbing the narrow servants' staircase that led up from the old kitchens. "Miss MacLeod," Lord Malcolm's voice echoed up the stairwell. "Are you there? I do hope you're not too uncomfortable." Rage flooded through Fiona, washing away her fear. She pulled Isla into an empty bedchamber and whispered urgently, "Stay here. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone except me or Mrs. Buchanan. Do you understand?" "But—" "Promise me, Isla." The child nodded, eyes wide with fear. Fiona waited until she heard the lock click, then turned to face Lord Malcolm as he emerged from the stairwell, carrying a lantern that cast grotesque shadows across his handsome features. "This is despicable, even for you," Fiona said, her voice shaking with fury. "Frightening a child." "The child is perfectly safe," Lord Malcolm interrupted. "This is between you and me, Miss MacLeod. You've had time to consider my offer. I trust you've come to your senses." "My senses tell me you're a monster. Let us out of here immediately." "Not until we reach an understanding." He set the lantern down and leaned against the wall, perfectly at ease despite the chaos of the storm outside. "You see, I've been thinking. Perhaps I was too hasty in threatening the child. You strike me as a woman of principle, and principles can be so inconvenient. So let me offer you a different incentive." He pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket. "This is a letter I received yesterday from a certain gentleman in Edinburgh. It seems there's been some question about the circumstances under which you left the McIntyre household. Something about missing jewellery and accusations of theft that were hushed up to avoid scandal." Fiona stared at him, stunned. "That's a lie. I never—" "Of course it's a lie. I wrote it myself. But who do you think society will believe? A penniless governess or a peer of the realm?" He smiled. "If you refuse to cooperate, I will spread this rumour far and wide. You'll never find respectable employment again. You'll be ruined, just as thoroughly as your great-aunt was ruined by my grandfather." "Your grandfather?" Fiona felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Oh, did you not realize? Thomas Drummond was my mother's father as well as Alistair's grandfather, which makes this entire situation rather fitting, don't you think? History repeating itself in the most delicious way." Lord Malcolm's expression hardened. "My mother was the legitimate child of that bigamous union. She should have inherited. But instead, the title went to her half-brother because he was male. And when he died, it went to his son Alistair instead of reverting to my mother's line. I've been cheated twice over, Miss MacLeod, but no more." Understanding dawned with horrible clarity. You knew about the secret marriage all along. I've known for years. My mother told me on her deathbed, made me promise to reclaim what should be ours. But I needed proof, and every scrap of evidence had been carefully destroyed, or so I thought. Then I heard whispers about a governess with MacLeod connections taking a position at Dunvegan, and I knew Providence had finally smiled on me. I won't help you, Fiona said firmly. Whatever you do to me, I won't be party to your schemes. Won't you, not even if I tell you I know where the original marriage registry is hidden, not even if I can provide you with additional proof beyond your precious letter, proof that would restore your family's honor completely? Fiona's resolve wavered. You're lying. Am I? My grandfather kept a detailed journal, Miss MacLeod. In it, he confessed everything, his marriage to Eileen MacLeod, his reasons for abandoning her, even the payments he made to ensure her silence. That journal is hidden somewhere in this castle, and I intend to find it. With or without your help. A tremendous crash of thunder shook the building, and simultaneously the door they had been standing near burst open. Fiona spun around, her heart leaping with hope. The Duke stood in the doorway, soaked to the skin, his dark hair plastered to his head, his eyes blazing with fury. "Malcolm," he said, his voice dangerously quiet, "step away from her." "Now." Lord Malcolm's face went pale. "Alistair, I thought you were in London, clearly." The Duke moved into the room with lethal grace. "I received an urgent message from Miss MacLeod, warning me of your threats. I rode through the night to return." His gaze shifted to Fiona, softening fractionally. "Are you hurt?" "No, Your Grace. But Lady Isla is locked in one of the bedchambers. She's frightened. Mrs. Buchanan is with her. I sent her ahead while I dealt with my cousin." His attention returned to Lord Malcolm, cold and implacable. "You have 5 minutes to pack your belongings and leave my property. If you're not gone within the hour, I will have you arrested for trespassing and attempted kidnapping." "You can't prove anything," Lord Malcolm blustered, but his confidence was crumbling. "I can prove you locked 2 people in a dangerous part of the castle during a violent storm. I can prove you've been questioning my servants about family documents without my permission, and, if necessary, I can call in the magistrate to investigate your finances. I'm quite certain we'll find evidence of debts and desperate circumstances that would provide motive for your behavior." The Duke's voice could have frozen fire. "Leave Malcolm now. And if you ever come near Miss MacLeod or my ward again, title be damned, I will personally throw you in the deepest prison I can find." Lord Malcolm looked between them, his handsome face twisted with rage and humiliation. Then, without another word, he turned and fled down the servants' room staircase. The moment he was gone, the Duke's controlled facade crumbled. He crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled Fiona into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "When I read your letter," he said raggedly, his face buried in her hair, "when I realized the danger you were in, I thought I would go mad. I've never ridden so hard in my life." Fiona stood frozen in his embrace, her mind reeling. She should pull away, maintain propriety, remember her place. But instead she found her arms moving of their own accord, wrapping around his waist, feeling the solid warmth of him, the rapid beating of his heart against her cheek. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I should have told you sooner, should have warned you." "Hush." He pulled back just enough to cup her face in his hands, his blue eyes searching hers. "You have nothing to apologize for. You protected Isla. You warned me. You were brave beyond measure." His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, a gesture so tender it made her throat ache. "When I thought of losing you—" "Your Grace, we shouldn't—" Fiona began, but the words died as his mouth descended on hers. The kiss was nothing like she had imagined a first kiss would be. It was not gentle or tentative. It was desperate, hungry, filled with all the fear and relief and longing that had been building between them since the moment they met. His hands tangled in her hair, scattering pins, and she pressed closer, her fingers clutching at his wet coat, drowning in the taste of him, the feel of him, the rightness of this impossible moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, reality came crashing back. "I shouldn't have done that," the Duke said, though he made no move to release her. "You're under my protection," In my employ. I've abused my position. No, Fiona interrupted firmly. You haven't. I've wanted. She couldn't finish. Couldn't admit aloud what her heart had known for days now. Fiona. He said her name like a prayer, like a plea. Tell me I'm not alone in this. Tell me you feel it too, this madness between us. I feel it, she confessed, and felt the last of her defenses crumble. God help me. I feel it. He kissed her again, softer this time, but no less devastating. And in that moment, with the storm raging outside and the castle trembling around them, Fiona knew she had reached a point of no return. She could no longer pretend this was simply a mission of vengeance. She could no longer deny what she felt for this man. She loved him. Impossibly, destructively, she had fallen in love with the Duke of Strathmore, and she was still hiding the secret that could destroy him. When they finally separated, both disheveled and shaken, the Duke took her hand and raised it to his lips. Come, we need to get you somewhere warm and dry, and I need to make certain that scoundrel actually leaves. They found Isla safe with Mrs. Buchanan, who tactfully said nothing about the Duke's appearance or Fiona's tumbled hair. Lord Sinclair and Lady Catriona, it emerged, had already departed that morning, having grown tired of the primitive Highland hospitality. Lord Malcolm, true to the Duke's ultimatum, was seen leaving within the hour, his expression murderous as his carriage disappeared down the mountain road. That evening, after Isla had been put to bed and the household had settled, Fiona stood at her window watching the last of the storm clouds dissipate over the mountains. She heard the door open behind her and turned to find the Duke standing there, properly attired now in evening clothes, his dark hair still damp but combed back from his face. I shouldn't be here, he said, making no move to leave. It's completely improper. Everything about this is improper, Fiona replied, but I'm glad you came. He crossed to stand beside her at the window. For a long moment, they simply stood together, not touching but achingly aware of each other's presence. There's something I need to tell you, Fiona began, her heart pounding. This was the moment. She had to confess, had to tell him everything before this went any further. I know, the Duke said quietly. Fiona's blood turned to ice. You? No. Malcolm revealed certain things before I found him with you, about your connection to my family, about the reasons you came to Dunvegan. He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. You're Eileen MacLeod's great niece, aren't you? The one he mentioned. Fiona wanted to lie, wanted to deny it, but she couldn't. Not to him. Not anymore. Yes, she whispered, and you came here seeking some kind of justice for what my grandfather did to your family. Yes, he nodded slowly, as though confirming something he had already suspected. I thought as much. There were small inconsistencies in your references, little details that didn't quite add up. I had Mrs. Buchanan make inquiries while I was in London. He paused, then added more gently, the question is, do you still seek that justice, or has something changed? Fiona met his gaze, knowing everything hung on this moment. Everything has changed. I came here angry, determined to right old wrongs, but then I met Isla and I met you and I realized... She took a shaky breath. I realized that vengeance is a cold comfort compared to what I found here. And what have you found? A home, she said simply. Purpose, and... She couldn't say the last part, couldn't speak of love when she still harbored secrets. The Duke reached out and took her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. Malcolm claimed you possess a letter, documentary proof of my grandfather's bigamy. Fiona's throat closed. This was it, the moment of truth. I do, she admitted. Written by the minister who witnessed both marriages. It's quite detailed. May I see it? With trembling hands, Fiona retrieved the letter from its hiding place beneath the loose floorboard. She handed it to the Duke and watched as he unfolded it, his expression growing darker with each line he read. When he finished, he carefully refolded the paper and handed it back to her. So it's true. My grandfather was a bigamist, which means my father was illegitimate, which means I have no legal right to the title I hold. I'm sorry, Fiona whispered. I'm so sorry. To her shock, the Duke laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. "Do you know what the truly ironic part is? I've spent my entire life trying to be worthy of this title, trying to honor my family's legacy, and all along it was built on lies and betrayal. My grandfather destroyed your family to protect a secret that has now come to light anyway." "What will you do?" Fiona asked, terrified of his answer. The Duke moved to the fireplace, staring into the flames. "That depends on you, Miss MacLeod. You hold the proof. You could take this to the courts down, to the House of Lords. You could strip me of everything and restore your family's honor. The law would be on your side." "I don't want that," Fiona said quickly. "Not anymore." "Then what do you want?" She moved to stand beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I want to burn this letter. I want to let the past stay buried where it belongs. I want—" She stopped, unable to continue. "What?" he prompted gently. "What do you want, Fiona?" "I want a future," she said, her voice breaking. "With you. With Isla. Here, in this impossible castle with its ghosts and its secrets. I know it's madness. I know I'm only a governess and you're a duke, but—" He silenced her with a kiss, pulling her into his arms with a fierceness that stole her breath. "You're not just a governess," he said against her lips. "You're the woman who made me believe in love again. The woman who showed me that honor matters more than title, that truth matters more than legacy. You're everything I didn't know I needed. But your position, your responsibilities, mean nothing without someone to share them with. Fiona, I'm asking you—" He pulled back, dropping to one knee with a grace that made her heart stutter. "I'm asking you to marry me, not because of guilt over my grandfather's crimes, not out of duty or obligation, but because I love you. Because in the space of a few short weeks, you've become essential to my happiness. Because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." Tears were streaming down Fiona's face. "The scandal—" "Let society talk. I'm the Duke of Strathmore. If I choose to marry a woman of good family who has fallen on hard times, that's my prerogative. Your father was a gentleman. Your lineage is respectable. We'll weather any gossip together." "Your Grace." "Alistair," he corrected. "My name is Alistair, and I need to hear you say it." "Alistair," she breathed, testing the name on her tongue. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you. God help me, yes." He surged to his feet and kissed her again, and this time it felt like a vow, a promise, a beginning rather than an ending. When they finally separated, breathless and smiling, Alistair took the letter from where it still lay on the side table. Together, they walked to the fireplace. "Are you certain?" he asked one last time. "This is your family's justice." "My family has had enough of vengeance and bitterness," Fiona said firmly. "Let this end here, with us. Let us build something new instead of being haunted by the past." Together, they fed the letter to the flames and watched as it curled and blackened, the words that had carried so much pain and anger dissolving into ash and smoke, but neither of them saw the figure watching from the shadows of the corridor. Neither of them realized that Lord Malcolm Fraser had not actually left the castle, but had merely pretended to depart, circling back through the servants' entrance to search for the evidence he needed. And neither of them knew that he had seen everything, the kiss, the confession, the burning of the letter, or that he was even now racing toward the village, toward the magistrate's office, where he would swear out a complaint of fraud and deception, setting in motion a chain of events that would soon threaten to destroy everything. As Fiona stood in Alistair's arms, feeling safe and loved for the first time in years, she had no idea that her greatest trial was yet to come. The morning after Alistair's proposal, Fiona woke to pale sunlight streaming through her window and a sensation of such profound happiness that for a moment she thought she might still be dreaming. But the slight tenderness of her lips from Alistair's kisses, the knowledge that he loved her and wanted to marry her, these were real, gloriously real. She dressed quickly, her hands fumbling with buttons in her eagerness to see him again, to confirm that last night had truly happened. But when she descended to breakfast, she found only Mrs. Buchanan in the small dining room, her usually composed face troubled. "Miss MacLeod, thank goodness. His Grace requests your presence in his study immediately. There's been a development." Fiona's happiness evaporated, replaced by cold dread. "What kind of development?" "I think it best if His Grace explains. But Miss MacLeod—" The housekeeper touched her arm gently. "Whatever happens, know that this household stands with you. We all do." Confused and frightened, Fiona hurried to Alistair's study. She found him standing by the window, still in his riding clothes, his face drawn and exhausted as though he hadn't slept. When he turned at her entrance, she saw fury and anguish warring in his expression. "Alistair, what's happened?" "Malcolm never left," he said without preamble. "He hid in the castle, watching us. And this morning, he went to the magistrate in the village with a complaint of fraud." Fiona felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "What?" "He's claiming that you infiltrated this household under false pretenses, that you seduced me into a compromising position while planning to blackmail me with fabricated evidence about my family's history." Alistair's hands clenched into fists. "He's demanding a full investigation, suggesting that you may have stolen from previous employers, that your references were forged. But that's all lies. He threatened me. He locked Isla and me in the East Wing." "I know that. You know that. But Malcolm is clever. He's positioned himself as the concerned family member trying to protect me from a scheming adventuress. And because he's a peer and you're—" He stopped, his jaw working. "A governess," Fiona finished quietly. "Someone whose word means nothing against his." "I won't let this stand," Alistair said fiercely. "I'll go to the magistrate myself. I'll testify to what he did, which will only lend credence to his claims that I've manipulated you," Fiona interrupted. "Don't you see? The more you defend me, the more it appears I've ensnared you somehow. That was his plan all along, to discredit me completely, so that even if I tried to reveal the truth about your grandfather's bigamy, no one would believe me." Alistair crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Then we fight. Together. We present the truth." A knock at the door interrupted them. A footman entered and his face pale. "Your Grace, the magistrate has arrived with 2 constables. They're requesting to speak with Miss MacLeod." Fiona's heart sank. It's moving so quickly. "Because Malcolm has influence and connections," Alistair said grimly. "He's called in favors, applied pressure, but we have something he doesn't." "What?" "The truth. Stand each other." He squeezed her hands. "I won't let him destroy you, Fiona, I promise." The magistrate, Sir Edward Cunningham, was a portly man in his 60s with shrewd eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He conducted his interview in the library, with Alistair present despite Fiona's protests that it might appear improper. "Miss MacLeod," Sir Edward began, his tone professionally neutral, "Lord Malcolm Fraser has made serious allegations regarding your employment here. He claims you obtained this position through falsified references, and that your true purpose was to infiltrate the household for nefarious reasons. How do you respond?" "My references were genuine," Fiona said steadily. "I served the McIntyre family in Edinburgh for 2 years. You may verify this directly with Lady McIntyre." "We shall." "Lord Malcolm also claims that you are related to a woman named Eileen MacLeod, who allegedly had some connection to the Drummond family. Is this true?" Fiona glanced at Alistair, who gave her an almost imperceptible nod. They had discussed this. Honesty was their only defense. "It is true. Eileen MacLeod was my great-aunt. She did have a connection to the Duke's grandfather, though the exact nature of that connection is complex and, frankly, painful for all involved. And you came to Dunvegan Castle knowing this connection existed?" "I did." "For what purpose?" Sir Edward leaned forward. "This is crucial, Miss MacLeod. Did you come here seeking revenge? Financial compensation? What were your intentions?" Fiona took a deep breath. "Initially, I came seeking answers. My great-aunt died in poverty, abandoned by a man who had made her promises. I wanted to understand why, but Sir Edward, whatever my initial intentions, they changed completely once I arrived. Lady Isla needed me. His Grace trusted me, and I found myself part of a household I came to care for deeply." "How convenient," a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Lord Malcolm entering, accompanied by a man Fiona didn't recognize, someone thin and elegant, with a face like a ferret. "Sir Edward, allow me to present my solicitor, Mr. Bartholomew Finch," Malcolm said smoothly. "He has some rather interesting information to share." The solicitor stepped forward, producing a sheaf of papers. "Miss MacLeod, Is it true that your father died deeply in debt? Yes, Fiona said warily. And that following his death, your family estate on Skye was sold to satisfy creditors. That is correct. And is it not also true, Mr. Finch continued, his voice taking on a theatrical quality, that the primary creditor who foreclosed on your family's lands was none other than the Duke of Strathmore's late father? The room went utterly silent. Fiona felt as though she'd been struck. What? I have the documents here, the solicitor said, spreading papers on the table. The foreclosure proceedings, dated 1862. The Duke of Strathmore, Alistair's father, purchased the debts and took possession of MacLeod lands on the Isle of Skye. Lands that, I might point out, had been in the MacLeod family for over 300 years. Fiona looked at Alistair, saw her own shock reflected in his face. You didn't know? I had no idea, he said, his voice rough. My father handled numerous business matters I was never privy to. If he purchased those debts, he never mentioned it to me. How convenient, Lord Malcolm repeated, his smile venomous. The Duke claims ignorance while benefiting from the spoils. Tell me, Miss MacLeod, doesn't that add a rather interesting dimension to your presence here? Not just seeking answers about your great-aunt, but seeking revenge for your family's complete destruction at Drummond hands. That's not... I didn't know, Fiona stammered, her mind reeling. Didn't you? Malcolm pressed. Or is this perhaps why you were so willing to accept a position here? Why you wormed your way into my cousin's affections? Because you saw an opportunity not just for vengeance but for restoration. Marry the Duke, reclaim your family's lost status, perhaps even recover those lands. How dare you? Alistair snarled, starting toward his cousin, but Sir Edward held up a restraining hand. Your Grace, please. We must conduct this investigation properly. He turned to Fiona, and she saw doubt in his eyes now. Miss MacLeod, these are serious complications. Your family had multiple grievances against the Drummond line. Which I knew nothing about, Fiona cried. My father never spoke of how we lost our lands, only that we did. I assumed bad investments, poor management. I had no idea your father was involved, Alistair. You must believe me. But even as she said it, Fiona saw how damning it looked. She had come to Dunvegan Castle hiding her family connection, concealing her possession of evidence about the Duke's legitimacy, all while her family had lost everything to his father. Malcolm had constructed a perfect trap. I have a proposal, Mr. Finch said smoothly. To avoid further scandal, which would harm His Grace's reputation as much as Miss MacLeod's, perhaps we might come to an arrangement. Miss MacLeod leaves Dunvegan quietly, signs a document agreeing never to make claims against the Drummond family, and in return Lord Malcolm will withdraw his complaint. Absolutely not, Alistair said flatly. Miss MacLeod has done nothing wrong, and I will not see her driven away by false accusations and legal manipulation. Then I'm afraid we must pursue this matter through the courts, the solicitor said, which means Miss MacLeod will need to remain available for questioning. Sir Edward, I believe you have the authority to restrict her movements. The magistrate looked deeply uncomfortable. Under the circumstances, and given the seriousness of the allegations, I must ask Miss MacLeod to confine herself to the castle grounds until this matter is resolved. She is not to leave without my express permission. This is ridiculous, Alistair exploded. You're treating her like a criminal based on nothing but Malcolm's spite and convenient coincidences. Your Grace, Sir Edward said firmly, I understand your concern, but there are legitimate questions that need answering. If Miss MacLeod is innocent, as you claim, then a proper investigation will prove it. But until then, I must follow the law. After Sir Edward and the constables departed, and Malcolm left with them, his expression triumphant, Alistair pulled Fiona into his arms. This is my fault, he said raggedly. I should have investigated Malcolm's finances sooner, should have anticipated that he'd try something like this. How could you have known? Fiona asked, her own voice shaking. He's thought of everything. Even if we tried to reveal the truth about your grandfather's bigamy now, it would simply look like I'm retaliating, trying to destroy you because I couldn't manipulate you. What are we going to do? Before Fiona could answer, Mrs. Buchanan appeared in the doorway, her face grave. "Your Grace, you need to see this. It arrived by special messenger." She handed Alistair a sealed letter. He broke it open, read quickly, and his face went white. "What is it?" Fiona asked. "It's from the Lord Advocate in Edinburgh. Malcolm has petitioned to have my legitimacy formally investigated. He's claiming—" Alistair's voice cracked. "He's claiming he has evidence that my grandfather's marriage was bigamous, that I have no legal right to the title, and that as the next legitimate male heir, the dukedom should pass to him." Fiona felt her knees give way. Alistair caught her, easing her into a chair. "He's going to do it anyway," she whispered. "Even without my letter, he's going to try to prove it." "How?" "We burned the only documentary evidence, the journal," Fiona said suddenly, remembering. "Malcolm mentioned that your grandfather kept a journal confessing everything. He said it was hidden somewhere in the castle." Alistair's eyes widened. "My God, if such a journal exists and Malcolm finds it, then he won't need my testimony at all. He'll have proof directly from the source." They stared at each other, as the full horror of the situation sank in. Malcolm hadn't needed Fiona's cooperation. He'd merely wanted it to speed up his plans. But with or without her help, he intended to tear down everything Alistair had built, to seize the title he believed was rightfully his. "We have to find that journal first," Alistair said decisively. "If it even exists. My grandfather's personal effects would have been stored somewhere." "The East Wing," Fiona interrupted. "That's why Malcolm was so interested in it. He must suspect it's hidden there." "Then we search every room, every piece of furniture, every loose floorboard. Mrs. Buchanan, gather the staff we trust absolutely. Explain what we're looking for, but swear them to secrecy. At once, Your Grace." Over the next 3 days, Dunvegan Castle became a hive of covert activity. While maintaining the appearance of normal household routine, Alistair, Fiona, and a handful of trusted servants systematically searched the East Wing for any sign of the Duke's grandfather's journal. They found many things: old correspondence, faded account books, even a collection of rather scandalous French novels that made Mrs. Buchanan purse her lips in disapproval. But no journal. On the 4th morning, exhausted and frustrated, Fiona sat in what had once been the old Duke's study, staring at the portrait of Thomas Drummond that hung above the fireplace. He looked stern and unforgiving in his military dress, but there was something in his eyes, guilt, perhaps, or fear. "Where did you hide it?" she muttered to the painted face. "Where would a man guilty of bigamy and abandonment hide his deepest secrets?" Her gaze fell on the portrait itself, noting how it was set slightly crooked in its frame, as though someone had moved it recently, or often. Heart pounding, Fiona stood on a chair and carefully lifted one corner of the heavy frame. Behind it, set into the wall, was a small metal strongbox. "Alistair," she called, "I found something." The box was locked, but Alistair produced a set of old keys from his grandfather's effects, and the third one fit. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a leather-bound journal. With trembling hands, Alistair opened it to the first page. In faded but still legible script, it read, "This account I write for God alone, as confession and penance for sins that will haunt me to my dying day. I, Thomas Drummond, did on June 12, 1799, marry Miss Eileen MacLeod in the kirk at Portree, Isle of Skye. 3 years later, at my family's insistence and with full knowledge that my first marriage still stood, I married Miss Margaret Sinclair, making myself a bigamist and my children by her illegitimate in the eyes of God and law." Fiona and Alistair read in stunned silence as Thomas Drummond's confession unfolded. His genuine love for Eileen, his family's fury when they discovered his secret marriage to a woman they deemed beneath him, the pressure to marry wealth and status instead. His attempt to annul the first marriage had failed because Eileen refused, still believing he would return to her. So he had simply married Margaret anyway, keeping Eileen's existence secret through a combination of distance, bribery, and threats. The journal detailed payments made to Eileen for her silence, his growing guilt as he watched his legitimate daughter and illegitimate son grow up, and finally, his deathbed fear that the truth would eventually emerge. The final entry was dated just days before his death. I have tried to make amends in small ways, anonymous gifts to Eileen's family, ensuring her daughter was educated, purchasing debts to protect what remained of the MacLeod estate from complete ruin. But these are hollow gestures, insufficient penance for the destruction I have wrought. Let this journal stand as testimony to my crimes, and may God have mercy on my soul and on my descendants, who will suffer for my sins. He tried to protect your family, Alistair said quietly. In his way, those debt purchases weren't malicious. He was trying to help. And then his son, your father, sold everything anyway, Fiona said bitterly, probably never knowing why his father had acquired them in the first place. What do we do with this? Alistair held up the journal. It's exactly what Malcolm needs to prove his case, but it's also the truth. Fiona thought of her great-aunt Eileen, dying in poverty while believing she'd been abandoned out of cruelty rather than cowardice. She thought of Alistair, who had spent his whole life trying to honor a legacy built on lies. She thought of Isla, who would lose everything if this became public. We destroy it, she said firmly. We burn it, just like we burned the letter. Let the truth die with those who created it. But Malcolm will continue his investigation, Alistair argued. He'll find other evidence, other witnesses. Then let him try. Without documentary proof, it's just rumors and speculation. The House of Lords won't strip you of your title based on that alone. Fiona took his hands. Alistair, your grandfather was a weak man who made terrible choices. But you are not him. You've shown honor, compassion, courage. You deserve this title not because of blood, but because of who you are. And what of justice for your family, for Eileen? My great-aunt is at peace now, and I— Fiona smiled through tears. I'm going to marry the Duke of Strathmore, reclaim my family's honor not through vengeance but through love, and make sure the next generation of Drummonds knows only truth and kindness. Alistair pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. You're sure? I'm sure. Together, they fed the journal to the fireplace in the old study, watching as Thomas Drummond's confession curled and blackened, his sins turning to ash. But neither of them noticed the small figure watching from behind the partially open door. Neither of them saw young Isla's wide eyes taking in every word, every gesture, her sharp mind filing away information that would soon prove either their salvation or their doom. And neither of them knew that Lord Malcolm had already found what he needed, not the journal, but something even more damning. A witness who remembered Eileen MacLeod, who remembered the wedding, and who was willing to testify in exchange for a generous payment. The conspiracy was unfolding exactly as Malcolm had planned, and the final confrontation was fast approaching. The summons arrived 3 days later, delivered by special messenger from Edinburgh. Alistair was required to appear before a special tribunal of the House of Lords to answer Lord Malcolm Fraser's petition regarding the legitimacy of his title. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks hence. They're taking this seriously, Alistair said, pacing his study like a caged animal. Malcolm must have presented compelling preliminary evidence to get this far. Fiona sat in the window seat, watching him with a troubled heart. Since burning the journal, she had hoped they might have more time to prepare, to build their own defense. But Malcolm was moving with ruthless efficiency. What will you say? She asked. The truth, or as much of it as serves our purpose. That Malcolm is a bitter, ambitious man who has long coveted my position. That his accusations are based on family rumors and old grudges, nothing more. Alistair stopped pacing and looked at her. But Fiona, there's something else you need to know. If this goes badly, if they strip me of the title, it won't come to that. But if it does, he insisted, you need to understand what that means. I would no longer be the Duke of Strathmore. I would be simply Alistair Drummond, with no title, no fortune, no estates. Everything would pass to Malcolm. Are you prepared for that possibility? Fiona rose and crossed to him, taking his hands in hers. I'm not marrying a title, Alistair. I'm marrying you. Duke or commoner, rich or poor, it makes no difference to my feelings. You say that now, and I'll say it every day for the rest of our lives if necessary. She cupped his face in her hands. We'll face this together. Whatever comes. Their moment was interrupted by a sharp knock. Mrs. Buchanan entered, her face more troubled than Fiona had ever seen it. "Your Grace, there's a woman here demanding to see you. She claims to have information about Lord Malcolm's petition. Her name is Mrs. Agnes MacDonald, and she says she knew your grandmother, Margaret Sinclair." Alistair and Fiona exchanged glances. "Show her in," Alistair said. The woman who entered was elderly, perhaps 80, with the weathered face of someone who had spent their life in service. But her eyes were sharp and clear, and she carried herself with dignity despite her worn clothing. "Mrs. MacDonald," Alistair said courteously. "Please sit. What information do you have?" The old woman settled into a chair with a grimace. "I was lady's maid to your grandmother, Your Grace. Served her from the day she married your grandfather until the day she died. And I'm here because Lord Malcolm Fraser came to me a week ago with gold in his pocket and lies on his tongue." "What did he want from you?" Fiona asked. "He wanted me to testify that your grandfather, the old Duke, had a wife before he married Miss Sinclair. Wanted me to say I'd heard him confess it, that I'd seen letters, that Miss Sinclair herself knew about it." Mrs. MacDonald's mouth compressed into a thin line. "He offered me £50, more money than I'd see in 5 years, to stand before the tribunal and swear to it." Alistair's face had gone very still. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him I'd think on it. Took his money as a down payment, let him believe I'd do it." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small purse, which she set on the desk. "But I'm here to give it back, Your Grace, and to tell you the truth instead." "Which is," Alistair prompted gently, "that your grandfather did marry before Miss Sinclair, that much is true. But Miss Sinclair didn't know about it until years later, and when she found out, it near broke her heart." The old woman's voice grew softer. "Your grandmother was a good woman, Your Grace, kind to her servants, devoted to her children. When she discovered the truth about the first marriage, she didn't rage or demand divorce. Instead, she quietly made arrangements to ensure that woman, Miss MacLeod, I believe her name was, received support. Not from guilt, mind you, but from compassion." Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. She helped Eileen. Aye, as much as she could without revealing the truth. Anonymous payments, gifts sent through intermediaries. It wasn't much, but it was what she could manage without her husband knowing. Mrs. MacDonald looked directly at Fiona. "You have the look of the MacLeods about you, girl. Are you kin?" "Eileen was my great-aunt." The old woman nodded. "Then you should know this. Your great-aunt was loved, truly loved by the old Duke. He made a terrible choice marrying again while she lived, but it was born of weakness and family pressure, not cruelty. And your grandmother knew it. She told me once, near the end of her life, that she'd lived her whole marriage feeling like an interloper, loving a man who'd given his heart to another." "Why are you telling us this?" Alistair asked. "Why refuse Malcolm's money?" "Because I served your family for 60 years, Your Grace. I loved your grandmother like my own mother, and I watched her suffer in silence to protect a secret that wasn't even hers to bear. I'll not see that suffering turned into fodder for a greedy man's ambitions." She stood, straightening her spine despite her years. "Lord Malcolm can do what he likes, but he'll not have my voice added to his lies." After Mrs. MacDonald departed, with the £50 Alistair insisted she keep as a pension, Fiona felt the first stirring of hope. "She'll testify for us?" she asked. "If needed, yes. But Fiona, we have to consider something else." Alistair moved to his desk, pulling out a sheet of paper. "Sir Malcolm is going to call witnesses, present whatever evidence he's gathered. We need to be prepared for the possibility that the truth will come out regardless of what we do." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying perhaps we should control how it comes out. Perhaps we should go to the tribunal and tell the truth ourselves, the whole truth. Present it not as something Malcolm discovered, but as something I'm voluntarily disclosing." Fiona stared at him. "You want to admit your grandfather was a bigamist? To voluntarily give up your title?" "I want to rob Malcolm of his weapon," Alistair said. "If I acknowledge the truth freely, he can't use it against me. And perhaps, just perhaps, the tribunal will take into account that I'm acting honorably, that I'm willing to step aside if necessary, rather than cling to a title I have no legal right to hold. But Isla, the estates, everything you've worked for, means nothing if it's built on continued deception. Alistair pulled her close. Banning my grandfather's sin was not just the bigamy, but the lies that followed. I won't compound that by perpetuating those lies. Whatever happens, I want to face it with honor. Fiona felt her heart swell with love for this man who would sacrifice everything for principle. But she also felt terror at what such honesty might cost them. Their discussion was interrupted by Isla bursting into the study, her face flushed with excitement. "Uncle Alistair, Miss MacLeod, I found something." The child was clutching a wooden box, ornately carved and clearly very old. "I was exploring the attic like you said I shouldn't," she admitted with cheerful disregard for rules. "And I found this hidden behind a loose brick in the chimney. Look." She opened the box to reveal a stack of letters, yellowed with age, tied with a faded ribbon. Alistair carefully untied them and read the first one aloud. "My dearest Eileen, I write this knowing I may never have the courage to send it, but write I must, for my heart will burst if I keep these words imprisoned any longer. You are my true wife, the only woman I have ever loved, and every day I spend away from you is an eternity of regret." They were all there, dozens of letters from Thomas Drummond to Eileen MacLeod, spanning decades. Letters he had written but never sent, pouring out his guilt, his love, his anguish at the choice he'd made. The most recent was dated just weeks before his death. "I am dying, my beloved, and soon I shall face God's judgment for my sins. I pray you have found peace and happiness without me, though I know I do not deserve such grace. I have left instructions for my grandson to make amends, though he will never know why. Forgive me, Eileen. In this life and the next, you were always my true wife, my only love." Fiona was crying openly now, years of anger and bitterness dissolving as she finally understood the full tragedy of her great-aunt's story. Eileen had not been callously abandoned. She had been loved, desperately loved, by a weak man who had lacked the courage to defy his family. "What do we do with these?" Isla asked, sensing she'd uncovered something important. Alistair looked at Fiona, and she saw the question in his eyes. These letters were evidence, not of bigamy, perhaps, but of the depth of feeling that had existed between Thomas and Eileen. They painted a very different picture from the cold calculation Malcolm was trying to portray. "We take them to Edinburgh," Fiona said decisively. "We present them to the tribunal along with your voluntary testimony. We show them that this isn't a simple case of fraud and deception, but a tragedy that has wounded multiple generations. We appeal to their compassion as well as their sense of justice, and if they rule against me anyway, then we face that together. But at least we'll have told the truth with dignity, rather than having it torn from us with shame." Alistair pulled both her and Isla into his arms. "You're both remarkably brave. You know that." "I learned it from you," Isla said seriously. "You always say that doing the right thing is more important than doing the easy thing." Out of the mouths of babes, Fiona thought, smiling through her tears. The night before they were to leave for Edinburgh, Fiona stood in the portrait gallery, studying the faces of the Drummond ancestors. These paintings had intimidated her when she'd first arrived, their stern expressions seeming to judge her for her deception. But now she saw them differently. Generations of men and women who had carried their own secrets, made their own mistakes, loved and lost and struggled with the same human frailties that plagued everyone, regardless of title or wealth. "Penny, for your thoughts," Alistair said, coming to stand beside her. "I was thinking how much has changed since I first walked these corridors, how much I've changed. You came here seeking justice for your family. Do you feel you've found it?" Fiona considered carefully before answering. "I found something better than justice. I found understanding. My great-aunt wasn't abandoned out of cruelty. She was loved by a man who was too weak to fight for her. Your grandmother wasn't a villain. She was another victim of the same circumstances. Even your grandfather, for all his terrible choices, suffered for them until his dying day." "No villains, then. Just flawed people trying to navigate impossible situations." "Exactly." Fiona turned to face him. "And tomorrow, we go to Edinburgh and prove that we're better than our forebears, that we choose truth over comfortable lies, honor over expedience. Even if it costs us everything, even then. Alistair cupped her face in his hands, his blue eyes intense in the candlelight. "I love you, Fiona MacLeod. Whatever the tribunal decides, whatever Malcolm tries to do, that truth remains unchangeable. And I love you, Alistair Drummond. Duke or not, titled or not, you're the man I choose. Today, tomorrow, always." Their kiss was tender, full of promise and fear and desperate hope. When they finally separated, Fiona noticed something she hadn't seen before, a small portrait at the end of the gallery, partially hidden behind a pillar. She moved closer, and her breath caught. It was a portrait of a young woman with auburn hair and grey eyes, wearing a simple dress of green wool. At the bottom of the frame, a small plaque read, "Eileen MacLeod, 1799. "He kept her portrait," Fiona whispered. "All these years, hidden but not destroyed. He never forgot her." "No," Alistair agreed softly. "He never forgot." They stood together in silence, honouring the woman whose love had set all these events in motion, whose sacrifice had ultimately led to Fiona and Alistair finding each other. The next morning, they departed for Edinburgh with Mrs. MacDonald, the letters, and a determination to face whatever awaited them with truth and dignity. But as their carriage rolled away from Dunvegan Castle, neither of them saw Lord Malcolm watching from a window of the village inn, a satisfied smile on his face. He had his own witnesses prepared, his own evidence ready, and he was certain that no amount of sentiment and romantic letters would overcome the brutal facts of law. The Duke of Strathmore was illegitimate. The title was Malcolm's by rights, and in 3 days' time before the tribunal in Edinburgh, he would prove it beyond any shadow of doubt. The game was nearly won, and Malcolm Fraser had never lost a game yet. Edinburgh in late autumn was a city of grey stone and persistent rain, where fog rolled up from the Firth of Forth to shroud the ancient streets in mystery. The carriage bearing Alistair, Fiona, Isla and Mrs. MacDonald arrived at dusk, passing through the new town's elegant Georgian squares before stopping at a respectable hotel near Charlotte Square. "You should have left me at Dunvegan," Isla said for the 10th time since their departure. "I don't want to be a burden." "You could never be a burden," Alistair replied, helping her down from the carriage. "And besides, you're the one who found the letters. You're part of this story now." The tribunal was scheduled to convene in 2 days at Parliament House, giving them precious little time to prepare. That evening, Alistair met with his solicitor, Mr. James Henderson, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s who had served the Drummond family for decades. "Your Grace, I must advise you one final time. Voluntarily admitting your grandfather's bigamy is tantamount to abdicating the title," Henderson said, his expression grave. "Once you acknowledge the truth before the tribunal, there is no walking it back. Lord Malcolm will have everything he needs to claim the dukedom." "I understand the consequences," Alistair said firmly, "but I will not build my life on lies, Mr. Henderson. My grandfather's sin was perpetuating the deception. I choose a different path, even if it means losing everything. Everything material, perhaps, but not everything that matters." Alistair glanced at Fiona, who sat quietly in the corner of the room. "I will keep my honour and the woman I love. That is enough." Henderson sighed but nodded. "Very well. Then we must craft your testimony carefully. We acknowledge the bigamy, but emphasize that you were unaware of it until recently, that you are acting in good faith to rectify historical wrongs, and that your character and management of the estates should be taken into account when determining the succession." "Will it work?" Fiona asked. "Honestly, I don't know. The law is clear. An illegitimate heir has no claim to a hereditary title. But there have been cases where extenuating circumstances were considered, where the tribunal exercised discretion rather than strict legal interpretation. It's a slim hope, but it exists." Over the next day they prepared meticulously. Mrs. MacDonald rehearsed her testimony about the payments to Eileen MacLeod and Margaret Sinclair's compassionate character. Fiona organised the letters chronologically, marking passages that demonstrated Thomas Drummond's genuine love and guilt. Alistair worked with Henderson to craft a statement that was honest without being self-destructive. The night before the tribunal, Fiona found herself unable to sleep. She stood at the window of their hotel room, watching rain streak the glass and blur the gas lamps below. "Can't sleep either." Alistair's voice came from the doorway. She turned to find him in his shirt-sleeves, his dark hair dishevelled, his expression weary. "I keep thinking about what happens if we lose. Where we'll go, how we'll live. We'll manage." He crossed to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "I have some investments separate from the entailed estate. Not a fortune, but enough to live modestly. We could take a house in the country, somewhere quiet. I could read law, perhaps, or manage estates for others. You could write. You have such a gift for storytelling with Isla. You've thought about this. I've thought about little else." He rested his chin on top of her head. "And do you know what I've realized? The prospect doesn't terrify me as much as it should. Losing the title means losing a burden I never asked for, a responsibility I inherited too young. Perhaps there's freedom in that. But your family's legacy..." "My family's legacy includes bigamy, abandonment, and generations of secrets. Perhaps it's time to start a new legacy, one built on truth and love rather than title and property." He turned her to face him. "I mean it, Fiona. Whatever happens tomorrow, I won't regret choosing this path, because it led me to you." She kissed him then, pouring all her fear and hope and desperate love into that embrace. When they finally separated, both breathless, Alistair smiled. "We should try to sleep. Tomorrow will be difficult enough without exhaustion clouding our judgment." But neither of them slept much that night. The next morning dawned cold and clear. They dressed in their finest, Alistair in formal court attire, Fiona in a severe but elegant gown of dark green wool that had belonged to her mother. Mrs. MacDonald wore her best black silk, and even Isla was dressed formally in a navy dress with a white collar. Parliament House was imposing, all stone columns and vaulted ceilings, echoing with centuries of legal proceedings and political intrigue. They were shown to a waiting room where Henderson briefed them one final time. The tribunal consists of 5 lords, 3 Scottish peers and 2 English, chosen for their legal expertise and impartiality. Lord Malcolm will present his case first, then we present ours. Be prepared for aggressive questioning. They'll want to test your credibility, particularly yours, Miss MacLeod, given your family connection." "I understand," Fiona said, though her hands trembled slightly. The tribunal chamber was austere and formal, with the 5 lords seated at an elevated bench. The room was surprisingly full. Word had spread about the sensational case, and dozens of curious aristocrats and legal observers had crowded in to watch. Fiona spotted Lord Malcolm immediately, seated with his solicitor, Mr. Finch, and looking supremely confident. When his eyes met hers, he smiled, a predator's smile, full of anticipated victory. "The tribunal will come to order," announced Lord Rothwell, the presiding judge, a stern man with white hair and piercing eyes. "We are here to consider the petition of Lord Malcolm Fraser regarding the legitimacy of the current Duke of Strathmore's claim to said title. Lord Fraser, you may present your case." Malcolm rose, every inch the wronged aristocrat seeking justice. "My lords, I come before you with a heavy heart but a clear conscience. It pains me to challenge my own cousin, but truth and law must prevail over sentiment. I am here to present irrefutable evidence that the current Duke of Strathmore is, in fact, illegitimate, and that the title rightfully belongs to the next legitimate male heir, which is to say, myself." Mr. Finch took over, laying out the case with clinical precision. He presented church records showing Thomas Drummond's marriage to Eileen MacLeod in 1799. He produced witnesses, elderly villagers from Skye who remembered the young couple, who recalled the hasty wedding, who testified that the marriage had never been annulled or dissolved. Then he presented records of Thomas Drummond's second marriage to Margaret Sinclair in 1802, complete with witness statements from that ceremony. "2 marriages, my lords," Finch declared dramatically. "1 legitimate, 1 bigamous. Under Scots law, the children of the second marriage, including the late Duke of Strathmore, father of the current Duke, were illegitimate. Therefore, the current Duke has no legal claim to the title." The tribunal listened with grave attention. Then Lord Rothwell turned to Alistair. "Your Grace, how do you respond to these allegations?" Alistair stood, his bearing dignified despite the tension in the room. My lords, I do not dispute the facts as presented. My grandfather did indeed contract 2 marriages, making the second bigamous and my father illegitimate under the law. A collective gasp rippled through the chamber. Malcolm's smile widened. However, Alistair continued, his voice steady and clear, I wish to provide context that I believe is relevant to your deliberations. My grandfather's actions, while legally indefensible, were not born of cruelty or calculation but of profound weakness in the face of family pressure. And the consequences of his actions wounded not just my family, but the MacLeod family as well. Wounds that have persisted for generations. Henderson stepped forward, presenting the bundle of letters. My lords, these are personal correspondences written by Thomas Drummond to Eileen MacLeod over the course of 40 years. They were never sent, but were preserved, hidden in the family estate. They provide a window into my client's grandfather's state of mind and demonstrate the genuine affection and guilt he carried throughout his life. Lord Rothwell examined the letters, passing them to his fellow judges. As they read, Fiona watched their expressions carefully. Some remained impassive, but others showed traces of emotion. Sympathy, perhaps, or at least recognition of the human tragedy underlying the legal facts. These are compelling documents, Lord Rothwell acknowledged, but they do not alter the legal reality, Your Grace. Bigamy is bigamy, regardless of motive. I understand that, my lord, Alistair replied, which is why I am not here to deny the truth or to cling desperately to a title I may have no right to hold. I am here to present the full truth, all of it, and to accept whatever judgment you deem just. That is most unusual, Lord Rothwell said, clearly surprised. Perhaps, but my grandfather's sin was compounding his original error with decades of deception. I will not make the same mistake, Alistair gestured to Fiona. Miss Fiona MacLeod, great-niece of Eileen MacLeod, is here today not as my accuser, but as my betrothed. She came to Dunvegan Castle initially seeking answers about her family's suffering, but together we have uncovered a truth that is more complex and more tragic than simple villainy. Malcolm shot to his feet. This is absurd. The woman is a fortune hunter, my lords, who infiltrated the Duke's household under false pretenses. Sit down, Lord Fraser, Lord Rothwell said sharply. You will have your opportunity to question witnesses, Your Grace. Please continue. Mrs. MacDonald was called next, and she testified with quiet dignity about Margaret Sinclair's discovery of the truth and her compassionate response. She could have exposed the whole affair, my lords, could have demanded an annulment and ruined the Drummond family. Instead, she chose to protect the children and to help Miss MacLeod as much as she could manage. That speaks to her character, and to the fact that not everyone involved in this tragedy was acting from selfish motives. When it came time for Malcolm's cross-examination, he attacked viciously. Mrs. MacDonald, isn't it true that you were dismissed from service to the Drummond family under suspicious circumstances? I retired of my own accord after 60 years of loyal service, she replied calmly. And isn't it true that you're being paid by the Duke to testify today? His Grace offered me a pension, as is customary for long-serving retainers. I'm here because of my conscience, not my purse. Malcolm then turned his attention to Fiona, his expression venomous. Miss MacLeod, you came to Dunvegan Castle under false pretenses, did you not? I obtained my position through legitimate references, Lord Fraser. But you concealed your family connection to the Drummonds. You concealed the fact that your great-aunt was married to the old Duke. Why? Fiona met his gaze steadily. I came to Dunvegan seeking answers about my family's history. I will not apologize for that. But what I found there changed me. I found a child who needed guidance, a household that welcomed me, and a man of honor who deserved better than the vengeance I had initially contemplated. How convenient that this man of honor happens to be a duke with vast wealth and estates. I would marry Alistair Drummond if he were a penniless farmer, Fiona said fiercely. His title means nothing to me. His character means everything. The testimony continued for hours, with witnesses called by both sides. Malcolm presented evidence of Alistair's father's foreclosure on the MacLeod estate, trying to paint it as deliberate cruelty. Henderson countered with evidence that the old Duke had actually purchased those debts to protect what remained of the estate from worse creditors, a fact that the younger Duke had been unaware of. Finally, as afternoon light began to fade through the chamber's high windows, Lord Rothwell called for final statements. Malcolm's was predictable, a passionate appeal to law and precedent, arguing that sentiment could not override legal reality, that the title must pass to the legitimate heir. When it was Alistair's turn, he stood and spoke from the heart. "My lords, I will not insult your intelligence by pretending this is a simple case. The law is clear, and I do not dispute it. My grandfather committed bigamy. My father was illegitimate. Therefore, I have no legal claim to the title I have held for 8 years, but I ask you to consider this. I have managed the Strathmore estates with diligence and care. I have improved the lives of the tenants, increased the productivity of the lands, and fulfilled every responsibility of my position. I have done so in good faith, believing myself to be the rightful duke. When I discovered the truth about my grandfather's actions, I did not attempt to hide it or destroy evidence. Instead, I chose to come before this tribunal and acknowledge it openly. Lord Fraser seeks this title for his own advancement. I sought to honor it through service. If you rule that the title must pass to him by law, I will accept that judgment with dignity. But I ask you to weigh not just the letter of the law, but the spirit of justice. Ask yourselves who will better serve the people dependent on the Strathmore estates, who will better honor the responsibilities that come with the title, someone who seeks it through honest disclosure, or someone who seeks it through conspiracy and manipulation. The chamber was utterly silent when he finished. Even Malcolm looked shaken by the power of Alistair's words. Lord Rothwell conferred quietly with his fellow judges, then addressed the room. This tribunal will adjourn to consider the evidence and testimony presented. We will reconvene tomorrow at 10 o'clock to deliver our judgment. As they filed out of the chamber, Malcolm caught up with Fiona in the corridor. "Very touching performance," he sneered, "but it won't change anything. The law is the law, and tomorrow I'll be the Duke of Strathmore." "Perhaps," Fiona said quietly, "but you'll never be half the man Alistair is, title or no title. You've already lost the only thing that truly matters, your honor." Malcolm's face darkened with rage, but before he could respond, Alistair appeared at Fiona's side, his presence a silent warning. Malcolm turned and stalked away, his solicitor scurrying after him. That evening they gathered in their hotel suite, Alistair, Fiona, Isla, Mrs. MacDonald, and Henderson, exhausted and anxious. "What do you think they'll decide?" Isla asked, her young face troubled. "I honestly don't know," Henderson admitted. "Just the law is on Lord Fraser's side, but I've never seen a petitioner voluntarily acknowledge such damaging facts. It may sway them, or it may simply make their decision easier." "Whatever they decide," Alistair said, pulling Isla onto his lap, "we'll face it together. We've told the truth, acted with honor, and that's all we can do." "Will we have to leave Dunvegan?" Isla asked in a small voice. "If the title passes to Lord Malcolm, yes, we'll have to leave. But wherever we go, we'll be together. You, me, and Miss MacLeod, who will very soon be my wife and your new guardian." "Promise," Isla whispered. "Promise," Alistair said firmly, and Fiona came to embrace them both. That night, Fiona dreamed of Dunvegan Castle, of its ancient stones and misty highlands, of the portrait gallery where Eileen MacLeod's painted eyes watched over the family that had both wounded and been wounded by her love. In her dream, the portrait smiled, and Fiona understood it as a blessing, a release from the past's grip. She woke to pale morning light and the sound of rain against the windows. Today, they would learn their fate. Today, the tribunal would decide whether truth and honor could triumph over law and precedent. As they dressed and prepared to return to Parliament House, Fiona took Alistair's hand. "Whatever happens today, I want you to know something. Meeting you, loving you, has been the greatest gift of my life. No tribunal can take that away. Nor can they take away what we've built together," Alistair replied. "A family, a love, a future. Those are ours, regardless of what else we might lose." They arrived at Parliament House to find the corridor outside the chamber packed with observers. News of the case had spread throughout Edinburgh, and it seemed half the city wanted to witness the judgment. Inside the chamber, the 5 lords sat with expressions of grave solemnity. Lord Rothwell waited for silence, then spoke. The tribunal has carefully considered all evidence and testimony presented in the matter of Lord Malcolm Fraser's petition regarding the Duke of Strathmore's legitimacy. This has been an extraordinarily complex case, touching on issues of law, morality, and justice. The facts are not in dispute. Thomas Drummond, grandfather of the current Duke, did indeed contract a bigamous marriage, rendering his children by that second marriage illegitimate under Scots law. Therefore, strictly speaking, the current Duke of Strathmore has no legal claim to the title. Fiona felt Alistair's hand tighten on hers. In the gallery, Malcolm leaned forward, triumph already visible in his expression. However, Lord Rothwell continued, and that single word hung in the air like a lifeline. This tribunal has the discretion to consider not just the letter of the law, but the interests of justice and the public good. We have been deeply impressed by the current Duke's voluntary disclosure of information that could only harm his own claim. We have taken into account his exemplary management of the estates, his care for his ward, and his obvious commitment to honour over expediency. That we have also considered the character and motives of the petitioner, Lord Fraser, whose pursuit of this claim appears motivated more by personal ambition than by concern for justice. His threats toward Miss MacLeod, his manipulation of witnesses, and his general conduct throughout this proceeding have not reflected well upon him. Malcolm's expression was darkening with each word. After much deliberation, Lord Rothwell said, "This tribunal has reached a decision. While we acknowledge that the strict law would support Lord Fraser's claim, we find that the unique circumstances of this case warrant the exercise of our discretionary powers. We therefore rule as follows. The current Duke of Strathmore shall retain his title and estates. However, he is required to make restitution to the MacLeod family for injuries suffered as a result of his grandfather's actions. Specifically, he shall restore to Miss Fiona MacLeod the lands on the Isle of Skye that were taken from her family, along with a sum of £10,000 as compensation for past wrongs. Furthermore, we require the Duke to establish a charitable trust in the name of Eileen MacLeod, dedicated to supporting women and children left destitute by the actions of their husbands or fathers. This trust shall be funded with an initial endowment of £20,000 and shall continue in perpetuity. Finally, we hereby bar Lord Malcolm Fraser from any future claim to the Strathmore title based on the facts presented in this case. Any such claim shall be deemed vexatious and subject to legal penalty. This is the judgment of the tribunal. It is final and binding." For a moment the chamber sat in stunned silence. Then pandemonium erupted. Malcolm surged to his feet, shouting protests, while the observers burst into excited chatter. Alistair sat frozen, as though unable to process what he'd just heard. Fiona threw her arms around him, tears streaming down her face. "We won," she whispered. "Alistair, we won." "We told the truth," he said wonderingly, "and it was enough. Truth was enough." Mrs. MacDonald was crying openly, and even Henderson looked emotional. Isla launched herself at both Alistair and Fiona, hugging them fiercely. Lord Rothwell banged his gavel, calling for order. "Lord Fraser, your objections are noted but overruled. This tribunal has spoken. You are dismissed." Malcolm's face was purple with rage. He looked at Alistair with such hatred that Fiona instinctively moved closer to her betrothed. But there was nothing he could do. The tribunal had ruled, and the law was settled. As Malcolm stormed from the chamber, Mr. Finch trailing apologetically behind him, Lord Rothwell addressed Alistair directly. "Your Grace, this tribunal was deeply moved by your integrity and your willingness to sacrifice position for principle. You have demonstrated that true nobility lies not in blood or title, but in character. We trust you will continue to honor your responsibilities with the same dedication you have shown to date." "I will, my lords," Alistair said, his voice thick with emotion. "And I will ensure that the trust and restitution ordered are established immediately. It is only just." As they left Parliament House, stepping out into weak Edinburgh sunshine, Fiona felt as though she could finally breathe after holding her breath for months. "I'm getting my family's lands back," she said wonderingly. After all these years, the MacLeods will have Skye again. Our lands, Alistair corrected, taking her hand. Once we're married, what's mine is yours, and what's yours is mine. We'll restore the estate together, make it beautiful again. And the trust for Great-Aunt Eileen, it's perfect. She would have loved knowing that other women would be helped in her name. That evening, they celebrated quietly in their hotel suite. Henderson brought champagne, Mrs. MacDonald baked a cake using the hotel kitchen, and Isla was allowed to stay up late, her eyes shining with happiness. "When will you and Miss MacLeod be married, Uncle Alistair?" she asked. "As soon as we return to Dunvegan," Alistair replied, smiling at Fiona. "I see no reason to wait. We've had enough drama and uncertainty. It's time for happiness. And will I still be your ward?" "You'll be our daughter," Fiona said gently. "In every way that matters. If you'll have us." Isla's answer was to hug them both so tightly that they laughed and protested they couldn't breathe. Later that night, as Fiona stood at the window watching the lights of Edinburgh twinkle below, Alistair came to stand behind her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I'm thinking about Great-Aunt Eileen. How she died believing she'd been abandoned, believing her love had been for nothing. I wish I could tell her that it all meant something in the end, that her great-niece found love with the grandson of the man she loved, that justice was finally served, and her name will be remembered with honor." "Perhaps she knows," Alistair said softly. "Perhaps somewhere she and my grandfather are finally at peace, their mistakes redeemed by what we've built from the ashes of their tragedy." Fiona turned in his arms, looking up at the man she loved. "Do you regret it? Telling the truth? You risked everything." "I regret nothing. We could have kept the secret, yes, but we would have spent our lives looking over our shoulders, waiting for the truth to emerge. This way, we're free. The past is settled, the debts are paid, and the future is ours to shape." He kissed her gently. "Besides, I've learned something important through all this." "What's that?" "That honor and integrity matter more than any title. That love is worth any sacrifice, and that you, Fiona MacLeod, are the bravest, most remarkable woman I've ever known." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and gratitude and joy into that embrace. When they finally separated, both were smiling. "Take me home, Alistair," she said. "Take me home to Dunvegan, where we can start our new life together. With pleasure, my love, with very great pleasure." And as they prepared to leave Edinburgh the next morning, neither of them spared a thought for Lord Malcolm Fraser, who sat alone in his rooms plotting revenge that would never come. They were too busy planning their future, a future built on truth, honor, and a love that had survived every test. The ghosts of the past had finally been laid to rest, and the future beckoned, bright with promise. Spring came to the Scottish Highlands with a gentleness that seemed almost miraculous after the storms of winter. The heather bloomed purple across the moors, wildflowers dotted the meadows in riots of colour, and the mountains stood proud against skies so blue they seemed painted. Dunvegan Castle, which had appeared so forbidding when Fiona first arrived, now seemed to glow with warmth and life. The wedding was planned for the 1st of May, exactly 6 months after Fiona had first set foot in the castle as a governess with secrets and vengeance in her heart. Now she was to become the Duchess of Strathmore, and the irony was not lost on her. "Stand still, Miss MacLeod, or I'll never get these pins right, Mrs." Buchanan scolded gently, though her eyes were suspiciously bright as she adjusted Fiona's wedding gown. The dress was magnificent, cream silk with delicate lace at the sleeves and neckline, simple but elegant, befitting a woman who valued substance over showiness. Fiona's auburn hair was arranged in soft curls, woven through with white roses from the castle gardens. She looked, even she had to admit, beautiful. "My mother would have loved this," Fiona said softly, touching the pearl necklace that had been her mother's only valuable possession. "She always dreamed I would marry well, though I doubt she imagined quite this well. Your mother would have been proud of you for reasons that have nothing to do with marrying a duke, Mrs." Buchanan said firmly. "You came here seeking justice and found something better, forgiveness and love. That takes more courage than most people ever manage." A knock at the door revealed Isla, dressed in pale pink silk. her dark curls tamed into ringlets. She carried a bouquet of white roses and heather, her face glowing with excitement. "Is it time yet? Uncle Alistair is pacing like a caged lion downstairs. Mr. Henderson says he's never seen a bridegroom so anxious." Fiona laughed, her own nervousness dissipating at the image. "Tell him I'll be down shortly, and Isla, thank you for being my flower girl. It means the world to me." "You're going to be my mother soon," Isla said seriously. Well, not really my mother, but close enough. That means everything to me." The wedding ceremony was held in the castle's private chapel, a small stone building that had witnessed Drummond weddings for centuries. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows, casting rainbow patterns across the ancient flagstones. The pews were filled with tenants from the estate, servants from the household, and a small number of carefully chosen guests, those who had supported Alistair through the tribunal and who genuinely wished them happiness. Notably absent was anyone from Malcolm Fraser's circle, though word had reached them that Malcolm had left Scotland entirely, taking himself to the continent where his bitterness and thwarted ambitions could fester in private. As Fiona walked down the aisle on Mr. Henderson's arm, the solicitor having volunteered to stand in for her late father, she saw only Alistair. He stood at the altar in formal Highland dress, the Drummond tartan draped across his broad shoulders, his dark hair gleaming in the sunlight, and his blue eyes fixed on her with such love and devotion that her breath caught. The minister, Reverend Campbell from the village, smiled benevolently as they took their places before him. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Alistair James Drummond, Duke of Strathmore, and Miss Fiona Catherine MacLeod. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God." Fiona barely heard the traditional words, so focused was she on Alistair's face, on the way his hand trembled slightly as he took hers, on the smile that played at the corners of his mouth. "And do you mark you, Alistair James Drummond? Take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part." "I do," Alistair said, his voice ringing clear and strong through the chapel. "And do you, Fiona Catherine MacLeod, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do you part." Fiona looked into Alistair's eyes and saw their entire journey reflected there. The suspicion and attraction of their first meeting, the growing trust and affection, the terror of nearly losing everything, and the triumph of choosing truth over deception. "I do," she said, and meant it with every fibre of her being. The rings were blessed and exchanged, simple gold bands that matched, symbolizing their equality and partnership. And then the minister pronounced them man and wife, and Alistair was kissing her with such tenderness and joy that Fiona felt tears slip down her cheeks. The chapel erupted in applause and cheers. Isla threw rose petals with enthusiastic abandon. Mrs. Buchanan dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, and even the stern old tenants from the estate were smiling. The wedding breakfast was held in the great hall, which had been decorated with spring flowers and ribbons. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh bread, cakes, and puddings. Musicians played Highland reels, and soon the floor was filled with dancers. Alistair led Fiona in the first dance, and she was acutely aware of how different this was from the first time they had dined together in this hall. She a frightened governess with secrets, he a suspicious duke trying to understand the newcomer in his household. "Happy," he murmured against her ear as they moved through the steps. "Deliriously," she replied, "though I keep expecting to wake up and find this is all a dream. If it is, then we're sharing the same dream, and I never want to wake." As the afternoon wore on, guests came to offer their congratulations and well wishes. The tenants presented Fiona with a beautifully embroidered shawl, made by the women of the estate. "Welcome home, Your Grace," they said, and Fiona realized with a start that she was no longer Miss MacLeod, but the Duchess of Strathmore. Later, when the formal celebrations had died down and most of the guests had departed, Fiona found herself in the portrait gallery with Alistair, Isla, skipping ahead of them. "We should have your portrait painted," Alistair said. To hang here with all the other duchesses of Strathmore. As long as the artist captures my character rather than just my appearance, Fiona said. I want future generations to know I was more than just ornamental. That will be the least of their concerns. Alistair laughed. They'll be far too busy reading about the scandalous duchess who came to the castle as a governess with secrets and ended up reforming the entire family. They stopped before Eileen MacLeod's portrait, which had been cleaned and restored, moved from its hidden corner to a place of honour in the gallery. I had a plaque made, Alistair said, pointing to the new inscription below the portrait. Eileen MacLeod, 1780-1840, beloved wife and mother. Her courage and dignity inspire us still. It's perfect, Fiona whispered, touching the frame gently. She would be pleased to know she's finally acknowledged. More than acknowledged. The trust in her name has already begun its work. We've helped 3 women and their children find safe housing and employment. It's small, but it's a start. It's more than that. It's her legacy, transformed from pain into purpose. Isla had run ahead to the window at the end of the gallery, and she called back to them excitedly, "Come look, how you can see all the way to Skye from here on a clear day." They joined her at the window, and indeed, in the distance, they could just make out the purple outline of the Isle of Skye across the water. "That's where we'll go for our honeymoon," Alistair said, "to see your family's restored estate. The builders have been working all winter, and they say the main house is nearly habitable again." "Our estate," Fiona corrected, echoing his words from Edinburgh. "And I want it to be a place where we can go as a family, where Isla can learn about her Scottish heritage, where future children can run wild on the beaches and climb the rocks." "Future children?" Alistair asked, his eyes lighting up. Fiona blushed, but met his gaze steadily. "I hope so. Many of them, if we're blessed." He pulled her close, mindful of Isla's presence but unable to resist. "I love you, Fiona Drummond, Duchess of Strathmore. Every day I thank God for the stubborn, brave, beautiful woman who came to my castle with revenge in her heart and stayed for love. And I love you, Alistair Drummond, Duke of Strathmore. Every day I thank God I found the courage to choose love over vengeance, truth over deception." "Are you two going to be mushy all the time now?" Isla asked with exaggerated disgust, though her eyes were twinkling. "Probably," they answered in unison, and all 3 laughed. That evening, as the last guests departed and the household settled into quietness, Fiona and Alistair walked through the gardens his mother had designed. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, and the air was soft with the scent of spring flowers. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had gone through with your original plan?" Alistair asked. "If you had revealed the letter and destroyed my claim to the title?" Fiona considered carefully before answering. "Sometimes, but I think I would have destroyed myself in the process. Revenge is a poison, Alistair. It consumes everything it touches. I'm grateful I found a better path before it was too late. We found it together," he corrected. "Fiaz, you showed me that honor means more than protecting a comfortable lie. I showed you that forgiveness can heal wounds. Vengeance would only deepen. We saved each other." They walked in comfortable silence for a while, until they reached the small graveyard where generations of Drummonds were buried. Alistair led Fiona to a new stone marker, simple but elegant. "I had this made," he said quietly, "in memory of Eileen MacLeod and Thomas Drummond. They couldn't be together in life, but at least we can acknowledge their love now." The inscription read, "In memory of a love that endured despite all obstacles, and of the wounds such love can leave. May they find peace at last." Fiona felt tears well up again, happy tears this time, tears of resolution and healing. "It's beautiful. Thank you for this." It felt important to acknowledge them properly. Their story was tragic, but it led to ours, which is anything but tragic. As they turned to walk back toward the castle, now glowing with warm light from its many windows, Fiona reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Dunvegan Castle seeking to right old wrongs, to punish the descendants of the man who had hurt her family. Instead, she had found a new family, a great love, and a purpose beyond mere vengeance. The past could never be changed or erased. Thomas Drummond had made terrible choices that had caused genuine suffering. But dwelling on those choices, perpetuating anger and bitterness across generations, would only create more suffering. Better to acknowledge the truth, make what amends were possible, and then move forward into a future built on different foundations. "What are you thinking?" Alistair asked, always attuned to her moods. "I'm thinking about the difference between justice and vengeance. Justice seeks to restore balance, to heal wounds and prevent future harm. Vengeance only seeks to inflict pain in return for pain. I came here seeking vengeance, but found justice instead, not the harsh, punitive kind, but the restorative kind that makes things whole again." "You're wise beyond your years, Duchess Fiona." She laughed at the formal title. "I'm not sure I'll ever get used to being called Duchess." "You'd better, because that's who you are now, though to me, you'll always be the fierce, beautiful woman who dared to challenge a duke and ended up stealing his heart entirely." They entered the castle through the garden door, climbing the ancient stairs to their private chambers. The household had retired for the night, giving them privacy for their wedding night. Alistair's rooms, now their rooms, had been redecorated for the occasion. Fresh flowers filled every vase, candles cast a warm glow, and the massive four-poster bed had been turned down invitingly. "Nervous?" Alistair asked gently, sensing Fiona's slight hesitation. "A little," she admitted. "This is all so new, so different from anything I imagined when I was just a poor governess dreaming of a different life. And now you're a duchess, mistress of an ancient castle, and the love of my life." He took her hands, his expression serious. "Fiona, we don't have to rush anything. We have the rest of our lives." She silenced him with a kiss, pouring into it all her love, her trust, and her desire. When they finally separated, both breathless, she smiled. "I'm not nervous about being with you. I'm nervous about being worthy of all this. The title, the responsibility, the legacy we're creating." "You are worthy," Alistair said firmly. "So I'm more worthy than I am, frankly. You came from nothing and built yourself into someone remarkable through courage and integrity. I inherited everything and nearly lost it through complacency. We balance each other perfectly." That night, as they came together as husband and wife for the first time, Fiona felt all her fears and doubts dissolve. This was right. This was where she belonged, in Alistair's arms, in this ancient castle, at the beginning of a new chapter not just for themselves, but for their entire family line. The weeks that followed were a blur of happiness. They settled into married life with surprising ease, dividing responsibilities and making decisions together. Fiona took on the management of the household with Mrs. Buchanan's guidance, began planning improvements to the tenant cottages, and started the preliminary work for the trust in Eileen's name. Isla flourished with two parents who loved her and gave her the security she'd been missing since her own parents' death. Her nightmares faded, her stubborn defiance transformed into healthy confidence, and she began to excel in her studies with Fiona's patient guidance. One afternoon, about a month after the wedding, a letter arrived from Edinburgh. Alistair read it with growing amazement, then handed it to Fiona. It was from the Lord Advocate, informing them that an investigation into Malcolm Fraser's finances had revealed extensive debts, gambling losses, and evidence of attempted bribery and witness tampering in the tribunal case. Malcolm had been stripped of his remaining honours and banned from holding any office of trust. Furthermore, new evidence had emerged proving that Malcolm's mother, Thomas Drummond's daughter from the bigamous marriage, had actually been adopted as an infant, meaning Malcolm had no blood claim to the Drummond line whatsoever. So even if the tribunal had ruled in his favour, he would have had no legitimate claim, Fiona said wonderingly. All his scheming, all his cruelty, was for nothing. "I almost feel sorry for him," Alistair admitted. "He spent his entire life pursuing something that was never rightfully his, destroying himself in the process." "Don't waste your sympathy. He made his choices, just as we made ours. The difference is we chose honour and truth while he chose deception and cruelty. We're reaping the rewards of our choices, and he's reaping the consequences of his." In June, they finally made the journey to the Isle of Skye to see the restored MacLeod estate. Fiona stood before the house where her father had grown up, where her grandmother had raised her children, where generations of MacLeods had lived and loved and built their lives. The house was not grand, nothing like Dunvegan Castle, but it was beautiful in its own way. Built of local stone with a slate roof, it sat on a hillside overlooking the sea, surrounded by gardens that were just beginning to bloom again after years of neglect. "It's perfect," Fiona breathed, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Alistair. Thank you for giving this back to me." "It was always yours," he said simply. "I merely helped restore what should never have been taken." They spent a week on Skye, exploring the island, meeting distant MacLeod cousins who were amazed and delighted to learn of Fiona's marriage and the restoration of the family estate. Plans were made to establish the house as a summer residence, where they could escape the formality of castle life and reconnect with simpler pleasures. On their last evening on Skye, as they walked along the beach where Fiona had played as a child, she turned to Alistair with news she had been keeping secret for several days. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. "About 2 months along, the doctor thinks." Alistair's face went through a series of emotions: shock, joy, wonder, and finally, overwhelming happiness. He picked her up and spun her around despite her laughing protests, then set her down gently and placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Our child." The next generation of Drummonds, built on truth and love rather than secrets and shame. Or the next generation of MacLeods, Fiona teased. "We could give the child my family name instead." Why not both? Drummond MacLeod, uniting both families, symbolizing the healing of old wounds. "I like that," Fiona said softly. "A new name for a new beginning." They returned to Dunvegan to joyous celebrations. Mrs. Buchanan immediately began fussing over Fiona's health. Isla was beside herself with excitement at the prospect of becoming a big sister, and the household buzzed with happy preparations. 7 months later, on a snowy January night, Fiona gave birth to a healthy baby boy. He came into the world with a lusty cry and a shock of dark hair, and when Alistair held him for the first time, tears streamed unashamedly down his face. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Absolutely perfect. What shall we name him?" Fiona had given this considerable thought. "Thomas James Drummond MacLeod. Thomas for your grandfather, not to honor his choices but to acknowledge the complexity of his humanity. James for my father, who taught me about honor, even as he lost everything else. And Drummond MacLeod to symbolize the unity of our families." "It's perfect," Alistair agreed. "Though I suspect everyone will call him Tommy. I can live with that." As spring returned once again to the Highlands, bringing with it the first anniversary of Fiona and Alistair's wedding, they stood together in the portrait gallery. A new painting had been added, a family portrait showing Alistair, Fiona, Isla and baby Tommy, painted by one of Edinburgh's finest artists. Unlike the formal, stiff portraits of previous Drummonds, this one was different. It showed them in the castle gardens, surrounded by flowers, with genuine smiles on their faces. Alistair had one arm around Fiona, the other resting on Isla's shoulder. Fiona held Tommy, who was reaching for a butterfly. They looked happy, alive, real. "What do you think future generations will say about us?" Fiona mused. "When they stand here and look at this portrait 100 years from now?" "I hope they'll say we were honest," Alistair replied. "That we chose truth over comfortable lies, love over duty, forgiveness over vengeance. I hope they'll say we took a legacy built on secrets and shame and transformed it into something worth honoring." "I hope they'll say we were happy," Fiona added, "that despite everything, the scandals, the tribunal, the near loss of everything, we found joy. We did more than find it, we created it." Alistair pulled her close, mindful of the baby sleeping in her arms. "Every day with you is a gift, Fiona. You came to this castle as a stranger seeking justice, and you became the heart of our home. And you took a woman determined to punish you and loved her into becoming someone better. We saved each other, Alistair. We're still saving each other every day." Isla, now 9 years old and growing tall, came running into the gallery with her usual enthusiasm. "Mother, Father, come quickly. Mrs. Buchanan says the first roses of the season are blooming in the garden, and you have to see them." Fiona and Alistair exchanged amused glances. A year ago, Isla had been a grieving, angry child, lashing out at anyone who tried to help. Now she was confident, loving, full of life and joy. "We're coming," Fiona called, and together they walked toward the gardens, toward the sunshine and flowers, and all the simple beauties of a life well lived. Behind them, the portraits of their ancestors watched in silent witness, Thomas and Eileen, whose tragic love had set everything in motion, Margaret, who had chosen compassion over cruelty, and all the other Drummonds who had carried their own burdens and made their own choices. The past would always be part of them, but it no longer controlled them. They had taken its painful lessons and transformed them into wisdom, its wounds into healing, its secrets into truths that set them free. And in the garden, as roses bloomed and baby Tommy gurgled contentedly and Isla laughed at some secret joy, Fiona reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here. She had come to Dunvegan Castle seeking to destroy a duke. Instead, she had found a husband, a daughter, a son, and a home. More than that, she had found herself, not the bitter, revenge-seeking woman she might have become, but someone capable of forgiveness, of love, of building rather than destroying. "No regrets?" Alistair asked softly, as though reading her thoughts. Fiona looked at him. This man who had chosen honor over position, truth over comfort, love over everything else. She looked at Isla, blooming into a remarkable young woman. She looked at Tommy, the future of both their families. And she looked at the castle that had become her home, its ancient stones now holding new stories of redemption and hope. "Not a single one," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. The future stretched before them, full of possibilities and promise. There would be challenges, certainly. There always were. But they would face them together, as they had faced everything else, with honesty and courage and love. The Duchess of Strathmore had come home, and in doing so, she had transformed not just herself but everyone around her, proving that even the deepest wounds could heal, even the darkest secrets could be brought into light, and even the most bitter vengeance could be transformed into redemptive love. This was their legacy now, not the bigamy and betrayal of the past, but the truth and love of the present. And it was a legacy worth passing on to future generations. As the sun set over the Scottish Highlands, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, the Drummond MacLeod family walked together through their garden, their laughter carried on the spring breeze, their hearts full of joy and peace. The past had been laid to rest, the future beckoned, bright with hope. And in between, in the precious present moment, they had everything that truly mattered. Each other, their love, and the courage to face whatever might come with honesty, integrity, and grace. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. What did you think of Fiona and Alistair's journey? Would you have chosen truth over title? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this Highland tale of love and redemption, please subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories. And if this touched your heart, give it a thumbs up. Until our next story together, sweet dreams